My long-time refusal to give arbitrary scores at the end of reviews has earned me several complaints from people, obviously some extremely thick people who can't pay attention for 10 seconds because they get distracted by clouds and shiny objects. But no series this year was euthanized quite so thoroughly as Metal Gear Solid. Not content with transforming the widely beloved central character into a terminally ill old fogey with a Magnum PI moustache, Metal Gear Solid 4 then proceeded to irreversibly tie up every slightest loose end with the rapid efficiency of an obsessive-compulsive man in a shoelace factory. Mirror's Edge was a hot contender for this award until I remembered that the game's badness didn't come as any surprise to me because it was by EA, and I am apparently more skilled in pattern recognition than most. So the award goes to none other than Grand Theft Auto 4, which decided that the best way to bring its speciality madcap sandbox fun into the new console generation was to dip the graphics in filthy dishwater, construct all the vehicles from depleted uranium, and break up the gameplay every 5 minutes to make you wheel your fat cousin to places and shovel burgers into his gob. Again, Mirror's Edge was a hot contender, as were Two Human and Haze and every other game no one gave a toss about before release and gave even less of one afterwards, but at the risk of beating a puddle of wobbling giblets that used to be a dead horse, I couldn't in good conscience give this award to anyone other than Sonic the Hedgehog for his latest opus, because he has been trying so damn hard for something like 6 games, but continues to fail to notice that all along he's been running on the spot in a pile of sticky, unplayable mess, which is at least laudable for its consistency. Sonic Team are to be congratulated for their epic storytelling and orchestral soundtracks and their sheer dogged determination to overlook the fact that their main character is a fucking cartoon rat. And so once again we slip into the D-cups of Lara Croft, world's worst archaeologist. When she's not putting her foot through inestimably valuable samples of ancient pottery, she's stealing every slightly shiny thing that was ever buried with some royal dead guy and hoarding them in her basement. And yet the academic world continued to let her run amok, probably because A, academics are basically the alpha males of the nerd pack, and B, Lara Croft is built like a giant bong with 2 footballs nailed to it. The story follows on from Tomb Raider Legend, which I haven't played, so I spent the whole game trying to figure out what was going on and who I was supposed to care about. The answer to that last question I eventually discovered: absolutely bloody no one, especially not myself. In fact, towards the end I was considering slitting my own throat with the game box just because pressing the off button would have taken slightly longer. At the beginning of Trunderworld, Lara has a boss fight with the giant Kraken, but the term boss fight may be a little generous. The bloody thing doesn't move. He's just chilling out in his front room. You can swim right up to his face and shake your ass and he won't even try to eat you. He just wants you to fucking leave before all the other oceanic horrors arrive for his housewarming party. So of course Lara drops a fucking spiky chandelier on his head and lets him die in agony. This is not appropriate conflict resolution. 2 utterly interchangeable factions are openly battling it out over the best way to make life better for the people, both wearing absolutely massive irony blinkers as they drive around the countryside shooting at anything U-shaped. Yes, it's very difficult to make friends in fiction easier. Your character must be wearing some kind of Michael Atkinson mask because everyone hates you on sight. See, for sandbox gameplay to work, you need a deeply varied world that calls for exploration, a la Saints Row 2, and or some kind of clear ultimate goal hovering overhead, a la Assassin's Creed. Far Cry 2 has neither. Its approach is to plonkers without instruction in the middle of nowhere and knock off for lunch. It brings to mind an animal rights activist freeing a captive bunny rabbit into the wild, only for it to bewilderedly sit on a daisy for several hours before a predator comes along and bites its entire body off. He's aided by his best friend and nothing else, Dominic, who has a missing wife, something which, by God, he is quick to remind everyone. Odds are she's dead because happy endings are for girls, and this is a game for big manly men with pecs like paving slabs. Anyone who shows any emotion besides grim determination or detached gallows humour is going to either die or get his balls kicked so hard that they blast out of his ears. But while Gears of War 2 represents everything that's wrong with mainstream gaming, it does so many things right you can't help but respect it. It's worth remembering that sometimes popular things are popular for a reason, because they're good, or because Will Smith is in it. The image of a cabal of black-suited fiends with red glowing eyes sitting around a spotlit conference table in a penthouse office wallpapered with banknotes gives us a nice comforting blame figure. Well, maybe for you. I'm part of the notoriously recession-proof entertainment industry, so I've been blowing all my money on guitars and beautiful Filipino boys, but jumping is also a rather difficult and inexact science, like coming up with analogies for these reviews when the air conditioning's bust. But the level design is really, really good. Like, something good that's made of chocolate. Fuck, sorry, I forgot. User-made content. There's a very in-depth level designer built in with a host of tutorials you'll be tempted to go through just to have Stephen Fry's voice tonguing your cock, Leah, for hours on end. And at the end of it, perhaps you could make some levels to put online for all to see, an act that will typically hold all the significance of gobbing into a river. I don't want to have to wade through waist-high rendering plant runoff to find the good levels, especially when I can do that just by playing the story mode. You know, the levels designed by professional fucking level designers. Skateboarding is a good example of something that could only exist in a truly decadent society. Take any other period of history, a guy puts wheels wheels on a plank, grinds down the steps of the Parthenon and breaks both his kneecaps on a pike staff, they'd have him slung in Bedlam to be gawped at by gin-addled chimney sweeps for the rest of his life. So if you're not a skater, but are merely interested in the lifestyle, possibly because you're putting together some kind of health insurance scam, be warned that Skate 2 tends to assume you're already on board, no pun intended, and isn't trying to be accessible or sell the whole pastime as glamorous or interesting, which is good, because if it was, it would be doing a pretty fucking shitty job. Flicking the right analog stick will do an ollie, flicking it 1 degree further to the right will do a completely different kind of ollie. The biggest challenge is just trying to remember all the various button combinations required to perform the mandatory tricks, but the absurdly low camera positioning and your avatar's big fat ass selfishly hogging screen real estate make it hard to judge distance and timing, and combine that with the frankly irresponsible speed you have to maintain most of the time, and the 2 most common tricks you'll pull off will be breaking a hip and getting stuck in the world geometry. One day, Armacam, a graduate from the Umbrella Corporation School of Business with limitless funding and extremely tentative occupational health and safety compliance, went about creating an army of telepathic clone soldiers. So essentially just as good as normal soldiers, but slightly quieter and capable of bending spoons. A scary-looking little girl called Alma is created to be their psychic commander, and Armacam keep her in a tank, knock her up against her will, steal her babies, then leave her to rot, these being surefire ways to endear oneself to an incredibly powerful psychic in direct command of inexhaustible supplies of mindless gun-toting killing machines. Now, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine a world where sequels are banned. Would this not be a beautiful place? Sure, we'd miss out on genuinely good sequels like Thief 2 or Half-Life 2, but I think that's a small price to pay. Every story would have to be fresh, so the writers would have to work extra hard to make the characters relatable. With no sequels, there are no franchises, so there'd be less fandom, so all the nerds will go off and become doctors and scientists and rid the world of all known diseases, and best of all, endings would have to have some fucking closure! Christ, it's a miserable time to be a game critic. The release schedule is nothing but old titles with incrementally larger numbers on the end. It's like reading the results table posted outside a special school. There's this black alien goo that turns people evil, unless it's the one from the Spider-Man 3 movie, in which case it just turns them into Jarvis Cocker. Anyway, Spider-Man used to own it when it was going through his black metal phase, but when he started listening to Europop, it hopped onto some other guy. Only in this game it hops back onto Spider-Man, only now it duplicates itself and creates lots more symbiotes, and already we've raised more questions than we've answered. So at this point the game yells, fuck it, let's just have a great big nerd off. If people want explanations, that's what Wikipedia's for. Then Wolverine shows up, and I swear this is true, he quizzes you on Spider-Man comic book trivia. That's pretty embarrassing, but not as much as the fact that I got most of the questions right. Web of Shadows makes the high-speed web slinging stay in mopping the floors while the combat goes out to beat up faggots. And combat's never going to be unique again. Fists, chains, ropes with spikes on the end, guns, swords, guns that are also swords. These are all roads well travelled. If I want to hurt people, I'll play God of War, or prowl the homeless shelters with a knife and garrote wire. House of the Dead as a series has long been the butt of jokes for its atrocious stories, disastrous translation, and calamitous voice acting, but at the same time it's also got a history of canny self-parody. House of the Dead 2 was re-released as a surprisingly hilarious typing tutor in which the guns were replaced by magical keyboards that blew off zombie limbs and heads with deadly shuriken-like nouns and verbs, and which I heartily recommend to anyone who feels that zombie massacres need not be precluded from the development of secretarial skills. And House of the Dead Overkill is so self-aware that its eyes have swiveled 180 degrees in their sockets. Readers of my online journal, I refuse to use the word blog because it sounds like something that lives on a riverbed and communicates through farts, will know that my continual disappointment in my preferred genres of entertainment have made me more open-minded to things I wouldn't usually consider, so I gave 50 Cent Blood on the Sand a chance. Rap, after all, is no less worthy than regular poetry as a cultural medium, more so perhaps. If you want to bone someone, I've never understood why you can't just come out with it rather than dance around the issue for 50 stanzas. At least hip-hop tends to be direct with its subject matter. It's just unfortunate that the subject matter is almost always guns, whores, and whores getting shot with guns. You play 50 Cent, obviously, fresh from having performed a concert in the Middle East where the hecklers must be pretty fucking brutal because he wears full combat gear on stage. A shady concert promoter is persuaded to pay him with an ancient diamond-encrusted skull, a priceless piece of boneyard bling that is almost immediately stolen by the local warlord. No one forms attachments to gaudy trinkets faster than 50 Cent, however, so he vows to end as many human lives as it takes to win back the priceless historical treasure he doesn't really have any claim to anyway. Hey, I think we found another potential husband for Lara Croft. In lieu of boss fights, for example, you shoot down the same helicopter about 4 times. I don't know what 50 Cent's got against helicopters. Maybe a helicopter stole his high school sweetheart and this is his chance for revenge. Every single major villain, when cornered, hops into a hitherto unnoticed gunship and flies around taunting you. It's like they're being issued by the government. Sometimes I get the impression that the game is covertly taking the piss out of 50 Cent, which I could understand because if the game itself is to be believed, his usual strategy when doing business with people is to kick the door down, pin them to walls, and bark demands like a fucking 5-year-old. Maybe if the world was a little less prejudiced and a little more accepting, then people might see that we all have the potential to be so much more, and then we could all work together to build a better world for everyone. Not that they'd know anything about work, the lazy nick. Resident Evil 4 was a game with an abundance of ideas. At any given moment you could be fighting a lake monster in a tiny boat, riding a minecart, navigating lava pits, or lest we forget, exchanging quips with squeaky-voiced midget Napoleon in the verbal warfare equivalent of 2 retards playing happy slaps. You have to look after her equipment too, so I let her have the machine guns because I wasn't going to touch the bloody things, and there were moments when she was carrying 500 bullets for them and was still using her fucking pistol all the time. She'd stand there pathetically picking away at the indestructible carapace of the giant crab monster of the moment, and when she was finished wasting wasting pistol ammo, she'd run off to break some crates and nick some more before I could. It's like watching someone beat their fists against a wall, then running off to hospital before coming back to do it some more. And they used my medical insurance, and it's my wall. Say my partner has an egg that I want to use. Can't just hand it to me, or even just pop it straight into my mouth like a flirty dinner date. I have to exchange it for something of mine, use the egg, then request my other item back, assuming she hasn't eaten it. It's like one of those fucking fox chicken worm puzzles. Let's close this review with a revisit of that lovely matter of racism that's been hanging around like a bad smell. RE5 actually does a lot to defer that accusation. Your partner is black, a bit. Quite a few whiteys are scattered throughout the early hordes, and real effort has been put into a somewhat realistic and sympathetic depiction of modern Africa. And then, halfway through the game, we suddenly find ourselves in a succession of mud hut villages, fighting crowds of jabbering black people in loincloths and war paint, chucking spears. Oh dears. I'm embarking upon an occasional quest to play games belonging to genres I've never really gotten into, a campaign I thoroughly expect to wholeheartedly regret the next time a big JRPG comes out, mostly due to my excremental boredom with the procession of identical powered armor space marines that clog up mainstream action gaming like so much hypermasculine mildew. As part of this venture, I have been playing Halo Wars, which may come across as a curious choice because it's a game about identical powered armor space marines, but I suspect I'm just the wrong sort of person for strategy games. I lack the patience to micromanage every unit. I'm also good looking and successful and socially competent, but still, Halo Wars by every account, also I'm not a virgin, but still, the business of selecting units is also a right arse, and that may sound like a small complaint, but small things lead to big problems, like a tiny piece of broken glass lodged in a urinary tract. You see, I was given a time limit to take down 3 enemy placements in order to rescue a bunch of trapped units. After several arduous battles, I'd ruined the enemy's shit, found the final group and sent them off to base via a path I'd completely cleared on the way there. But at a point when the base could almost certainly see them without a telescope, I ran out of time and the units disappeared. We lost contact, went a character. Bull fucking shit. All possible threats were dead. We didn't lose contact. I was looking at them. They were right fucking there. We were close enough to communicate by waggling our eyebrows at each other. What the fuck happens when the stupid arbitrary time limit runs out? Do their battle royale collars explode? They all lose honour and disembowel themselves? What? And just to put the cherry on it, you know who they were? Absolutely bloody no one. Generic faceless pricks of the sort I'd grown about 50 of that day alone. But we didn't make it in time, so they were going to make me do the whole fucking mission again. As the exasperated Chinese zookeeper said to the last male panda in the world, fuck that! The DS meanwhile is not a turd, and good thing too with all those sharp corners, it's just that it kind of does its own thing. It does it well, but GTA is from a different world. Chinatown Wars is therefore the bastard offspring of 2 forbidden lovers from 2 warring families, tragically shot dead while trying to elope by a hired gun, played in this drama by myself. Too late, sadly, to prevent the child being born and coming out a little bit malformed. Chinatown Wars returns us to the Liberty City of GTA 4, albeit missing Alderney, but it took too long to open up Alderney, so no one cares. The limited visibility is also not helped by a camera that appears to be mounted on the head of a drunk obese man on a Segway, lurching sickeningly about when you're trying to make the god-awful targeting system lock onto an enemy and not, say, an unarmed man on the other side of a wall, on the Hebrides. You may be unsurprised to hear, then, that the game is frustratingly difficult, in which case prepare to be surprised, because it isn't. Mad World is mature in the sense that it's one of those curious cases of a game that approaches gore with the same childlike glee with which a schoolboy approaches trapped insects, then paradoxically forbids children to play it. It could also be considered mature in the sense that it's presented in an idiosyncratic cel-shaded black and white visual style, but one suspects that this came out of artistic statements second and compensating for Wii graphics limitations first. As is presumably intended, the presentation reminds me very much of Japanese comic books, because I can never tell what the fuck's supposed to be going on in those either. But they're let down by the controls. Ooh, Yahtzee hates the controls in a Wii game. What a bold defiance of established trends. Sarcastic applause. Fuck you, buddy. I'll stop ragging on the Wii motion sensor when a heavenly choir descends to Earth to fix the fucking things. The PMC point out that the US can't stop them doing private business dealings with whoever they want, and that's probably true. But then, they invade Washington, bomb the White House, and try to shoot down Air Force One. I'm pretty sure the US are within their rights to stop them doing that. Who the hell's running this company? Scaramanga? Why would a PMC invade the US? What were they going to do after killing the president? Declare themselves king? And where were they hiding all the soldiers and hardware you'd need to wage war on a global superpower? The fucking moon? I know that drama demands that the enemy actually be a plausible threat, but I still think it'd have been more credible if the villains had been an army of disgruntled insect people from the Earth's core. Wearing silly hats. I played the first Siren game on PS2 and found it lacking. Well, let's not mince words. A game could fire white-hot shurikens from the disk drive that lodged directly in the smell centre of my brain so that I perceived nothing but eggy farts for all eternity, and I'd still rate it higher than Siren 1. I almost gave up on the very first chapter when I was asked to escape from a zombie cop, only to find that every route was a quite literal dead end that would get me shot and killed. Turns out I was supposed to go down a forest path that was virtually undetectable between muddy graphics, foliage, confusing camera angles, and my own personal retardation, then hide under a shed until the cop went away, after which I could return to the main road explode and get shot and killed as part of a cutscene to continue the story. As the leper said to his mistress, where's the bloody points? Okay, so Pitch Black was a good film if you're into that sort of thing. It had Claudia Black getting her crotch pulled off, and that's always a plus, but the best part was the character of Riddick, because he was clearly vital for the survival of the other characters, but utterly unpredictable. You were never sure if he was motivated by a genuine spark of compassion inside his stony psychotic exterior, or if he was only saving the others so he could pull out their brain matter and use their empty skulls as muesli bowls. Speaking of which, the gameplay is mostly stealth focused. Hang on, they've given us a gun! I guess it's a shooter now then. Oh, no, wait, the gun contrivably fell behind a fridge, and all my other guns spontaneously disintegrated. Now it's a melee brawler. If you're new to this series, let me briefly summarise my feelings for Japanese RPGs. There was this one guy, a sniper, looked like he was suffering from reverse aging and he just felt his testicles being absorbed into his body. He seemed to hit maybe 1 out of every 10 shots. And every time I brought him along, the enemy would always aim for him first. It was uncanny. It was like he was so dense that his gravitational pull sucked every passing bullet right into his face. Instant game over is the moment the guards so much as smell your farts for an example of bad stealth. And while Velvet Assassin does give you the opportunity to fight back or evade when you're spotted, they have assault rifles, you have a pistol, they have several friends, you have a bad haircut, so they might as well just dump you to the load screen to try again for the 16 hyper-billionth time. One thing's for sure, this definitely wasn't an American production, because if it was, it would have ended with Hitler's volcano doom fortress sinking into the ocean while Violet watches from the deck of a nearby submarine with the orphan children she rescued from the underground genetics lab. Out of curiosity, I looked up the developers, and they're actually German, which surprised me, because I heard that if you even mention the Nazis in Germany, then the government come over and set your house on fire. Duke Nukem Forever is a genre-defying masterpiece, combining elements of first-person shooters, adventure games, RTSs, typing tutors, cooking mama, and ordinarily I'd expect such a game to feel schizophrenic and thinly spread, but it all merges seamlessly together in a way I thought impossible. I started the game first-person shooting at terrorists in a military complex, then 4 or 5 hours later I was in a restaurant on the moon making ravioli for an incoming alien wedding party, and I honestly couldn't tell you where any significant changes occurred in the intervening time. But what really boggles my mind is the sheer amount of effort that went into the fake screenshots and trailers that were released throughout development to give the false impression that the game was an utterly generic brown FPS that any competent studio could have farted out in a year or two, and that the entire team were time-wasting cock sections with the work ethic of an overweight house cat with no legs. And Duke Nukem Forever put all my concerns to rest. 10 years after the alien conquest of Earth, a middle-aged and jaded Duke is in hiding in Stockholm under the name Vladimir Lestrade, until a letter from his estranged daughter in the Resistance begs him to come to their aid, and thus begins an epic tale of redemption and self-discovery that will take us from the Swedish ghettos to beyond the furthest stars. And while I don't want to spoil too much, I was extremely moved by the scene in which Duke tearfully reunites with his daughter, and then she puts on a bikini and dry humps his leg. It's difficult to pin down my favourite aspect of Duke Nukem Forever between the dolphin races and the gun that shoots dogs and the liberal use of full frontal nudity, but I think the achievements deserve particular mention. It's not just the usual token achievement every time you beat a chapter and a big one at the end. No sir, Duke Nukem Forever makes you fucking work for your gamer score. There's the achievement for beating the final boss using only your ears. There's the achievement for playing the whole game with the controller immersed in icy water. The achievement for placing a Wii Fit board in front of the TV and obliterating it with a croquet mallet. But the hardest one of all is the achievement for turning off the console, leaving the house, meeting a nice girl, taking a sailing boat around the world, having 3 beautiful blonde children, and finally dying content with the knowledge that we didn't spend 12 years waiting for an utterly pedestrian sequel to a game that everyone stopped caring about around 1997 to be released by a developer that makes John Romero look on the ball. Which is a huge challenge, because if just one of those kids turns out brunette, then you have to start all over again. I immediately started hookshotting my way up the nearest building, and the first thing I noticed was that the swinging mechanic feels as smooth and pleasant as a clockwork bumfuck. No matter how fast you were going when you started, you always swing at the same speed, because momentum is for pussies, and at the end of the swing your character breaks wind and lurches forward sickeningly. It all feels very stiff and unnatural, and there's a dick joke in there somewhere. Anyway, once I got accustomed to all that and resumed climbing, halfway to the prize a big fat radiation symbol appeared and my skin fell off. Is Bionic Commando a good game? It's a knotty question. The controls take some getting used to, but once you're there they work, I guess. Loading times are an arse, but the scenery is nice, at least I think it was. The levels whiz by so fast it's hard to tell. There was one odd moment when I strolled into a big boss arena-like place that probably took some designer quite a while to put together, but after a short unplayable cutscene in which my hero beats up another character, all I could do was stroll out again. Then I was all like, did I just win the boss fight? Yay me! But that doesn't make the game bad, it's just weird. I think what does make Bionic Commando bad is the fact that it's a whore! Today's superpower lottery winner is Cole McGrath, a name that's half Irish and half dipshit, a courier who was dicking around with his package when it blew up in his face, which just goes to show that registered post is probably best for delivering your MacGuffins. Cole gains the power of electricity while everyone around him gains the power of dead, and Cole must decide whether to help rebuild the city he just destroyed or make what remains into his little electro bitch. Judging by the way he looks like a cross between an EastEnders character and an angry potato and talks like a blender full of gravel, the game suspects he'll favour the second option, if that weren't already obvious from the fucking title. Project Natal. I know they pronounced it Natal, but I'm going to keep calling it Natal because that's what it looks like, and it's a really fucking creepy image. The only thing creepier would be a grown woman flirting with a dead-eyed CG 10-year-old while Peter Molyneux stands in the background gushing about it. It may be an amazing bit of technology, but all these motion sensor concepts have to eventually face the fact that people play games to unwind, and no one unwinds by coming home and waving their arms about like an air traffic controller covered in beetles. The Last Guardian by Team Ico is slightly more interesting in that it seems they've just made Ico again, but replaced escorting a recent concussion victim with tearing shit up on a giant monster, which is definitely a positive step, but do bear in mind that the monster in question is far too lovable to survive to the end of a Team Ico game. Alan Wake. Ironically, waking will be the exact opposite of what this game will make you do. Sonic All-Stars Racing. First thought, why the fuck does Sonic the Hedgehog need a car? Second thought, why the fuck does Sonic the Hedgehog need to still exist? Final Fantasy XIV. I feel that anything I could say would be repeating myself, so I'm just going to express my feelings with a strangled noise from the back of my throat. Main character, Cole McGrath and Alex Mercer, two ugly men with gravelly voices, but at least Cole tucks his shirt in. Personality-wise, they actually create a pretty interesting contrast. The player chooses whether Cole is a tragic, selfless hero or electro-crossed with Ming the Merciless, but both personalities are at least consistent. Alex Mercer, on the other hand, doesn't make any moral choices besides murder everyone or murder everyone and eat them as well, but a lot of his dialogue and cutscenes keep trying to paint him as a decent but wronged man just out for justice. I had to laugh at a moment when I was on a mission ploughing a tank through a crowded street, and over the agonised screams, Alex said, "Gosh, I sure hope this is the right thing to do." It's like if Mr. Bean were a mass murderer. Conclusion. The final scores are 3 points apiece. So much for the fucking scientific method. I suppose we could say then that the games are equally fun and that there's room in this world for both, but fuck that. History needs to know which is best, so I'm going to award victory to whichever game's developer sends me the best picture of the other game's main character wearing a woman's bra. Well, you have to design and maintain the house in which they live. That's about it, actually. On the surface, you seem to have complete control over their lives. You can trap them in a tiny room with no amenities and watch them slowly starve. If you're a bitter antisocial dickhead and you've alienated everyone who ever loved you and you like to think you're funny and aloof, but really you're dying inside and also you smell. So I guess what I'm saying is that all women are evil, bewitching innocence with their insidious emotions and absorbing our manhoods into their rank, blood-streaked spam sandwiches. Who needs them? Incidentally, I'm still not gay. A couple of years on from the last movie, the Ghostbusters are still making ends meet in the city with the shortest memory in the world and have hired a new trainee. That's you, who is a mute, because they obviously like hearing themselves talk so fucking much. The Ghostbusters' quest is to firstly save the city of ingrates from an ancient evil, and secondly come up with various contrived reasons to revisit as many characters and locations from the movies as they feel they can get away with. If, like everyone who doesn't have blunt objects lodged in their brains, you thought Ghostbusters 2 was dreadful, you'll be gratified to hear that the decline since the first movie has remained constant. All the colour and lovability of the characters has been worn down like an old boiled sweet, and you can almost hear a doped-up sitcom audience guffawing at the cringeworthy humour and cheering every time anyone walks in the room. That's what I always hate about revivals of really old franchises. The creators are always just a little bit too much in love with the subject matter. That's why everyone in the new Doctor Who spends all their time alternating between sucking the Doctor's balls and asking for more. You could argue that there's no need to help trap an enemy that your allies are already trapping, and then perhaps I could go and make a cup of tea and read the paper while they finish the game for me. Yeah, on that subject, if the tortuous writing and voice acting don't dissolve any affection you ever had for the Ghostbusters, the AI will seal the deal. I can see I'm not the only one who has trouble making out what's going on in the combat, because those smartasses get knocked over more often than a Subutio player mouthing off to his pimp. And just like in Gears of War, we'll need to be resurrected by an ally, so on top of all the aforesaid combat blindsiding issues, I have to break off the fight every now and again to do the retard roundup. It's like keeping plates spinning in the middle of a mosh pit and the plates won't shut the fuck up. Once upon a time, a fresh-faced youngster saved up all his pennies and bought his first PS2, and with it he bought a game called Red Faction 1, and after rushing home to play, he discovered that Red Faction 1 was not a very good game. Actually, it was total shite on a crusty roll, and on that day, something changed in that optimistic youth. He realised that for all the pomp and excitement of a new console generation, there will always be shite, and no amount of emotion engines can unshite the shite. Thus began his downfall into the black, emotionless, flinty-hearted creature you see before you. Recently, Red Faction Guerrilla came out, and you know when Conan the Barbarian watched his village being destroyed as a kid and 20 years later gets the opportunity to avenge himself on the guy who did it? That's kind of where I'm at right now, so here it is, a game about a bunch of twats doing shit no one cares about. Other rebels can join you, but you can't control when that happens. At one point while driving somewhere, I accidentally broke a lamppost and a bunch of rebels assumed I'd started the insurgency and began gunning down the filth. I was terribly embarrassed. And of course they die very easily and you lose morale when they do. I can see why I was able to become the iconic hero of the revolution 2 hours after joining it, because clearly before me all the revolution did was stand around with their thumbs up their butts. I found the best way to survive was to stay in a vehicle for as long as possible, ploughing right into your objectives, but the terrain becomes so strewn with debris it's very easy to get stuck. It's like driving through post-nuclear Hiroshima right after the pubs closed. Recently we received a mail from someone whose name I forget, explaining that they were going to stop watching Zero Punctuation. I don't remember their exact wording, but it went something like, "I am an absolute cretin who can't tell a good thing from a stick up my arse, and I'm obviously very passive-aggressive as well, but mainly it's because you keep ragging on my beloved Wii." Wii. So I guess I've got terrible taste and I'm probably also a paedophile. And I guess whoever he was, at a point, I do tend to overstate that the Wii is a shiny white spunk bubble swelling out from between the yellow teeth of a crack whore. So in the name of winning back my lost audience, this review of Wii Sports Resort will contain nothing but absolute praise and possibly some child pornography. Wii Basketball. Hold up the Wiimote and flick it just like flicking a real basketball. At that point, where exactly the basketball goes is left up to the ineffable machinations of fate. But hey, you don't want skilled players making everyone else feel inadequate, those pricks. Wii Power Cruising. It's just jet skiing, although it sounds like some kind of business executive euphemism for soliciting prostitutes. You hold the controllers out and rev the Wiimote to go faster, and it controls just like a real jet ski if it had both its handlebars broken off and was sitting on a gravel driveway. Wii Bowling! Oh, fuck off. In all seriousness, Wii Sports Resort is mostly functional, and you could probably have a lot of fun playing it with friends or some children you intend to molest. Well, diddle my dog. Who would have thought when I first put two little white dots on a black spiky thing that it and I would today be celebrating our 100th video? Together they search for a cursed Aztec treasure and fight over the affections of a redoubtable Mexican lady with that uncanny spaghetti western love interest talent for almost getting raped by everyone she meets. Seriously, leave this bint alone in a waiting room for now and she'll find a way to get raped by the chair. At the start of each mission you choose which of the two effectual brothers you want to play as and the AI will control the other. As Thomas you can shoot more accurately, throw lassos and climb ledges, and as Ray you can open the pause menu, restart the mission and choose Thomas instead, you fucking idiot. This may surprise you, but... Sorry. Call of Juarez is actually a good game. I've had a lot of stuff to complain about, but there's a lot to like, too. The shooting ultimately works, and the story and setting are surprisingly well realised. I know for a fact there's at least one guy at Rockstar who'll be disappointed, because he was hoping I'd totally bag it out and clear the way for their upcoming Red Dead Redemption thing. But hey, if that's good too, maybe we could have another of those cross-dressing art competitions, and if not, second place isn't so bad. It's just a number after all. Like, say, for example, 100. I read in the gaming journals that the Conduit uses special technology that makes it look as good as games on the PS3 and Xbox. Then I waited a few minutes for the punchline, but apparently they were serious. To put it charitably, the game is fucking ugly. This isn't even because of the Wii. I've seen better looking Wii games and even GameCube games. This is more on the level of a PS2 that someone's trodden on. I can't remember the last time I saw a game depict a skyline by painting one on a wall and erecting it a few feet away from the window. That's shit I'd expect from a Tex Murphy game, and Christ, this is turning into a good review for obscure references, isn't it? The sole element the Conduit can claim as a unique gameplay mechanic is a glorified flashlight that reveals invisible locking mechanisms, essentially doing nothing but adding an extra phase to the press button open door routine. Don't worry if you're not keen on scavenger hunts though, because the presence of a nearby invisible thing is helpfully indicated by the soundtrack going bidee while you're still trying to clear the room with those fucking insidious scuttlefuck spawners. And then when you think you've cleared the room and put your weapon away to shut the fucking thing up, lo and behold, there was another monster spawner on the ceiling you couldn't see because you can't look up. By the standards of current day gaming, the Conduit is a pile of sodden cereal boxes held together with string, and I would sooner recommend nailing your tongue to a subway train. The resort is built on a spot where a lot of people have been mean to a lot of other people over the years and subsequently has an alarming tendency to shift into evil, foggy versions of itself. Then a load of doofuses run around trying to stop an evil cult from summoning a dark god and ruining the tourist trade, but being on the PS1 it now looks like an arse made out of Lego, and the level of doofy the doofuses exhibited make it hard to take seriously. Silent Hill 2 was smart enough to realise that the only character worth expanding on from that shower was the town itself, so it took the basic concept of an evil town where you can't use a microlight and took it in a new direction. Now the town had always had some dark power behind it, and the events of the first game had just let it come out of its shell somewhat, so having freed itself from the first rack of doofuses, it was now ready to knuckle down and really start fucking with some heads. You see, Silent Hill 2 is very good at telling a story without words. Everything is drenched in symbolism. The basic monsters are all suspiciously effeminate, with the exception of Pyramid Head, in his first appearance before he totally sold out, an uber-masculine powerhouse repeatedly seen plunging his massive throbbing knife into the other monsters' moist, quivering bodies, which obviously symbolises neoconservative imperialism. You start to think that James's nightmare might be entirely of his own creation, as if the town is just handing him a set of jumplies and watching as he sticks them on his balls. It's a fascinating voyage of pain and despair that leaves you emotionally drained and satisfied, like fucking a burning dolphin. You are an insane, constantly burning man escaping from a laboratory who possesses the ability to generate explosions without damaging himself. Okay, maybe it's not that simple. I find the character Explosion Man intriguing. Is he a conjuration of scientific folly whose madness stems from haunting existential uncertainty, or was he once human and now erects a giggling facade to conceal the wrenching internal sadness he feels for what he has lost? The game's answer to these questions is a resolute who gives a shit. Now butcher your fellow man in a consequence-free environment, you pussy. The second installment of the new Tales of Monkey Island episodes recently came out, so I will review them in two ways. Firstly as a fan of the old series in my normal voice, and secondly by their own merits in a ridiculous Irish accent. In the second episode of Tales of Monkey Island, a character whistles a snatch of music from Monkey Island 2, which might have been kind of cool if he had not then said, "Gee, I wonder where that music's from. Wink wink, slurp slurp, tongue bath." I'm reminded of a cat showing affection to its owner by gobbing a dead bird onto his rug. Oh, Faith and Begorra, look at this lovely pirate game I've honestly never heard of. You play a pirate named Guybrush Threepwood, what a silly name, who accidentally releases an evil plague upon all his pirate chums or something. I wasn't really paying attention because I was thinking about potatoes at the time. Sadly, the situation can't be resolved by murder like with most games and Protestants. You have to go through the little square dance of dragging both items into a little combining machine and pressing the on button. Don't see why we can't just click one then the other. Seems like that would save me some time, which I could have spent beating me wife. You know what future historians will say about us, right? There were two very different games within the same 20-year period, both called Wolfenstein, and the second one was not strictly speaking a remake of the first. From this we conclude that the people of the early 21st century were taking the piss. So he's sent to a big German town where some serious shit's going down, there's an active resistance in need of assistance, and everything's gone greyish-brown. It soon becomes clear that the city's been invaded by occult committees, mystical preachers and slavering creatures, and gymnasts with stonking great titties. And in between all of the shooting, you also must think about looting, because if you want to upgrade, someone has to be paid, and the shopkeepers don't like freebooting. Why do all games need upgrading elements, even ones where it isn't quite relevant? It means all your big hitters start off in the shitter, and your aim is unfirm and inelegant. So when you've extinguished the danger, you backtrack through all of the chambers, searching every last nook for cash and checkbooks, which you won't find much fun, I would wager. It transpires that the in-game reality has pretensions to non-linearity. The game says, on your bike, go wherever you like, as long as it's in this principality. But the freedom's a mere gilded cage that adds nothing to inspire or engage. It just means beating feet through the same boring streets just to get to the next fucking stage. I know what you're gonna say. Yahtzee, you slick internet paparazzi. Surely it's always fun to stick the butt of a gun up the arse of a goose-stepping Nazi. Well, if you like starting punch-ups in bars, or your head has been lodged up your arse, Wolfenstein may give at least some joy to Viv, otherwise don't bother. 2 stars. I had my doubts about Arkham Asylum because it looked like a dark, gritty game with scary horror elements, and how can you have scary horror when you're Batman, ostensibly the most capable fictional character since Jesus? Ooh, edgy! I just love that bit in The Dark Knight when Gary Oldman and Aaron Eckhart are talking about bringing down the mob, but it could almost be a scene from The Departed until Batman flounces in wearing pyjamas and a bucket on his head and no one bats an eye. But once I'd mentally adjusted for Batman's underpants, I made the shocking discovery that Arkham Asylum is quite good. Another tool in Batman's arse is the detective vision. I guess you can't call it bat vision because that would just be a black screen. When it's turned on, you can see enemies through walls, secrets, objectives, and things you can grapple onto. So a pertinent question might be, why would you ever want to turn it off? The pertinent answer would be because otherwise you'll see the whole game through a coloured filter and all the characters will be replaced by glowing teal skeletons, and you might feel a bit guilty about all those artists who put so much work into not making the game look like a surreal radioactive skeleton fever dream. Which the absolute nadir of the whole game for me is an encounter in a sewer with Killer Croc, which they spend the whole game hyping up, and which consists of walking very slowly around a tedious labyrinth waiting for Croc to pop up, whereupon you whack him back down with a single batarang in the manner of a dog owner wielding a rolled up newspaper. If there's any band I can still bear even while their songs are being filtered through plinky plonky guitar rattles and the raucous caterwauling of a room full of early 20-somethings, it's the Beatles. But I'm forced to remind myself why I didn't like Guitar Hero Metallica and the whole concept of single band games. Surely the rock band model is intended for parties, and its job is to supply a variety of songs from various bands and genres for maximum group appeal. And there will be people at a party who don't want to play the Beatles all bloody night. They'll be the ones who are drinking rubbing alcohol and trying to rape the cat. Some of you are now asking yourself, what the hell is Darkest of Days? Or has Yahtzee been fucked over by release dates again? Or will alternative energy sources ever be sustainable? Or what is the capital of Botswana? Or why do nice girls hate me? To answer those questions in no particular order, no, self-esteem issues, a little bit, an independent first-person shooter available on Steam and Xbox 360, and Gabberoni. The gameplay is a string of disappointments, lifting me up and knocking me down over and over again like it's playing Guess Who with my heart. It makes itself out as a Crisis-style open-ended shooter where you can go anywhere on the map and pick your own method to meet the objective, and for that reason it is going to hell for lying. Scribblenauts comes to us from Fifth Cell Media, a bunch of work-shy cheaters whose most notable previous title is Drawn to Life, a game so unfinished that the player had to do half the art design themselves. Scribblenauts, meanwhile, is a rather Spartan puzzler in which you help a guy in a stupid hat acquire stars, for as a great t-shirt once said, it is always stars. The stars are variously stuck up trees, frozen in ice, and misfiled by poorly trained temporary office workers, so you must recover them by writing down the name of what you're required to do so, whereupon it will materialise. I'm choosing to believe that this is an act of penance on the developer's part. After Drawn to Life they wanted to prove they're not above drawing stuff themselves, so they drew every single object on Earth. Your character is not so much controlled as aimed, like a retarded rhino on rocket skates. Clicking on the point where you want to go sounds simple enough, but when you sprint directly towards it, flailing your arms regardless of what obstacles are in the way or what carefully balanced conjurations you kick over, you have a recipe for grinning hyperactive disaster. Don't ask how I got into this situation, but on one level I had a truck hanging Italian job style over a lava pit with the star embedded in an ice block sitting on the end. I had an ice pick and all I had to do was carefully move along the truck, smash the ice and get the star. Even if I fell into the lava, if I had the star I'd still win, with an agonising flesh vaporising victory dance. But as I tapped on the block to break it, it shifted slightly and I clicked the background, and fuck, it was like my character had been waiting all day for me to do that. He flung his pick into the air and started jumping up and down like he wanted to be a cloud when he grew up. I'd call him a fucking drunken spastic, but apparently those words don't exist. Sometimes they don't tell you anything at all, like the level where your only hint is to reenact the climax of Back to the Future. Meaning what? Drive along the road very fast, get struck by lightning, contract Parkinson's disease? There's a school of gaming that thinks games need to be more cinematic, a school where they have to put padding on every solid surface and none of the students are allowed near anything sharper than a crayon. The main character is Ruby, a tomboyish assassin who is about as likeable and sympathetic as a deep-sea anglerfish in an SS uniform. At this point, the game designer designer's boss says, "Okay, that's the combat. What other gameplay mechanics will there be?" "Well," replies the game designer, whom I will name Pillock, "how about on some of the levels everything goes all red and black and cel-shaded?" No," says Pillock's boss, nobody's fool but his own. "That's just the same gameplay mechanic in pretentious arty bullshit-o vision." "Oh right, I misunderstood you at first," replies Pillock. "There's also some Prince of Persia-style platforming sections, but you know how in Prince of Persia it was always clear where you were supposed to go and what was alleged and what wasn't? Well, I think we should do the exact opposite of that and occasionally plunge important platforms in total darkness so you have to make leaps of faith like it's the Last Crusade." "That sounds good," says Pillock's boss. "Actually, no, that sounds awful. And why is your head bandaged?" "Also," continues Pillock, "every now and again during a cutscene a button will flash up, and if you don't press it fast enough you have to start the cutscene all over again because of global flobal wobbly bits." "Those are called QuickTime events," says Pillock's boss with increasing concern, "and they're the worst idea in the world." "I know it's the best idea in the world," says Pillock, "so I'm just going to make a load of those instead of boss fights, and the final climactic level will just be an extra long sequence of them because trying to be creative makes blood come out of my nose." "I'd better go now," says Pillock's boss, making motions towards the exit and eventually a phone to call the police. "Wait," yells Pillock, banging his head against the desk for attention. "What about special challenge modes where you have to get around a training course in a certain time?" "That's actually not a bad idea," says his boss, stopping at the door. "I know," says Pillock. "That's why I'm going to occasionally force the player to complete one during story mode for no apparent reason except to appease the octopus that lives in my head." Then Pillock's boss goes away and throws himself in front of a train, although it was stopping at the station so he pretty much just makes a fool of himself. Here we have two warring kingdoms, each a mirror of the other. On one side, a nation of decadent bourgeoisie toadstool people ruled by an aloof aristocrat whose original function has become buried beneath luxurious ceremony, while the other kingdom is populated by a downtrodden working class led by a charismatic union leader, a sort of Jimmy Hoffa if you were a fire-breathing turtle lizard thing. A tragic figure who evokes the paradox of the lower middle class as he loudly trumpets his opposition to those of higher status even while desperately seeking their approval. To this everlasting stalemate comes an anarchistic revolutionary who seeks to bring chaos to the two warring faces of order, symbolising the inevitable entropy and decay that comes with political stagnation. Then Bowser eats a magic mushroom and sucks the Mario Brothers into his body, but you probably shouldn't read too much into that. I don't have a problem with aiming games at kids, although I do despise kids. Seriously, I don't think you quite grasp how much I loathe children. Given 3 wishes, I'd ask for a puppy, a decent chip sandwich, and for every childbearing womb on the planet to pop out and fly away like a cheery parade of greasy red balloons. Brutal Legend is about Jack Black starring as Jack Black playing Jack Black, who is the heavy metal roadie mysteriously transported to a sort of cross between Narnia and the Ozfest, and so takes the Flash Gordon Army of Darkness approach to the fish out of water genre, that is, take the motherfucker over. On the way there'll be a very expensive soundtrack of Guitar Hero classics and voice cameos from virtually everyone who ever curled 2 fingers into their palm while extending the other 2, with the exception of Spider-Man. It's a wide open sandbox game, so it can be added to the ever-growing landslide of sandbox games. I mean, honestly, pretty soon there's going to be enough sand and boxes around to replicate Bondi Beach after a nearby warehouse explosion. All the hacky-slashy drive-aroundy the game appears to be is mere crust upon a surface of big RTS battles that dominate the second half of a painfully underweight story campaign. It's like buying a car on the strength of its 4 magnificent wheels, but it starts to peel away in layers as you drive it along the highway until only a unicycle remains, which might be a perfectly good unicycle, but I don't know how to ride a fucking unicycle. In his continued efforts to essentially be Nicolas Cage in the movie National Treasure, he has now acquired his very own Sean Bean, who, to his credit, almost goes a whole hour before turning out to be the bad guy. So what's new since Uncharted 1? Well, something between bugger and all. And things got even worse later on when Drake started grinding up bits of wall and snorting them loud enough to give away his position, but when that happens and you attempt melee combat, it is kind of cool that you do so by madly tapping the square button. It's nice to see a control mechanic based around what most players are going to do anyway. Perhaps next they could introduce platforming sections that can only be solved by throwing your controller at the screen. Let me just restate that Uncharted 2 is by no stretch of the word bad. It's all very balanced and compelling and cinematic and all the other words from the GameSpot review generator. Nathan Drake seemed to get beaten up a lot more than in the first game, which certainly improved the experience for me. Maybe by the end of the third game we'll be controlling a big pile of giblets and teeth. Serves him right, the glib self-righteous tosser. Here's the story. At the borders of the kingdom of Felden, a sinister army of darkspawn masses. A power struggle has broken out between the usurper turned Logain and oh Christ, are you listening to this? I feel like this should be scrolling over a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger looking bored on a throne. So basically, if you like fantasy RPGs, then Dragon Age is about as definitive as they get, and if you don't like fantasy RPGs, then I guess you could just go off and have sex with people instead. Stop those credits, it's time to announce the winner of the Stonking Great Game Contest. We had some very strong entries and some utterly rubbish ones as well. Actually, there weren't many strong entries at all, and most of them were about as captivating as a dead dog in a skip. According to the statistics, if you are an organic life form, you already own around 2.7 copies of Modern Warfare 2. This game has been selling like hotcakes lodged in copies of an unreleased Harry Potter book set during Hermione's Bicurious phase because the much-touted controversial mission managed to find that magical sweet spot where it's not offensive enough to get banned, but enough to get lots of free publicity on national television. So in case you don't already know, and statistically that means you live on one of the moons of Jupiter, an early mission in the game has you join a small group of Russian terrorists gunning down unarmed civilians in Moscow airport, but it's okay because A, you're really an undercover CIA agent, and B, you don't actually have to kill anyone and can hang back and pretend your arthritis is flaring up, and C, they're Russian civilians and who gives a shit about them. Fortunately, there are some short, snacky one-off missions that I could play co-op with my male friend. You complete them to gain stars to buy more of them. So it's basically the Guitar Hero state-sponsored genocide, but we actually had a lot of fun with them. I even caught myself using phrases like take point and watch my six without any trace of irony or mock Jack Bauer voice. We especially enjoyed the stealth missions in which we lay together in the long grass watching each other's backs, not gay. So just to summarise fellas, the soldier nuking was good, but civilian shooting, bit of a flop. By all means experiment. For Modern Warfare 3, how about having us stomp on a little girl's puppy, then scoop up the remains on a bit of paper with a Holocaust denial written on it? Assassin's Creed 2's plot doesn't even have a decent recap before blandy future Desmond hooks up with a fish woman who takes him to her secret society consisting of two people who look like they were hired from the local community youth group. Now Desmond must relive the memories of Italian Renaissance man Ezio Auditore in order to learn assassin skills. I guess all the stuff we did with Altair in the first game was just for warm-ups, or they wanted him to learn the skills from someone with more emotion than a spoonful of rice pudding, and who doesn't react to water like a fucking Barocca, and who could walk briskly down the road without a 12th century SWAT team descending on his hooded arse like a platoon of winged monkeys. The other thing is that while Screed 2 is definitely better than its predecessor, it's just too easy. While guard pursuits in Screed 1 could be almost harrowing, the guards in Screed 2 are willing to dismiss you if you so much as turn your collar up the other way. One of the later weapons you unlock is no joke, a fucking gun. Now in the 15th century that's just not giving anyone else a chance, is it? And without wishing to spoil anything, the final boss fight is a punch-up with a fat bloke. Today I'd like to review two recent 4-player co-op titles, Left 4 Dead 2, the latest in a series that is increasingly trying to resemble a car registration number, and New Super Mario Super Wii Brothers 2 The Revenge of the Return, etc. First of all, yes, I was forced to play the cut-down Australian version of Left 5 Dead 7 because of our crotchety old man government who think that everyone under the age of 40 is a serial rapist waiting to happen, so playing it was like visiting a McDonald's in a foreign country, the same but with an odd sense of unfamiliarity, and they don't sell chicken nuggets. Mind you, at least Left 4 Dead 2 London SW1 has some steps forward, even if it's just a shuffling of the feet towards a cliff edge. Even a single chip of plaster knocked off a prison wall is at least some progress. Super Wii New Brothers Mario is the prisoner who cements over his own escape attempts, then sticks his head in the toilet. What really has been the point of the last 15 years if you're just going to make Mario 3 again, complete with chirpy NES sound effects still intact on what is ostensibly a current generation console, no less? Oh, but there is 4-player co-op, a feature that is absolutely perfect if you find yourself short of gift buying money this Christmas and need to lose 3 friends as quickly as possible. The player characters all bounce off each other, so once you go beyond one player, it's like trying to precision platform in a tumble dryer full of cricket balls. But while this and all those staggered out Team Fortress 2 extras are mildly diverting, Valve, wasn't there a Half-Life Episode 3 you were supposed to be working on? I'm starting to feel like I've come to a Rolling Stones concert and the Rolling Stones don't feel like coming out, so they're trying to keep us amused with an old TV showing episodes of the Jetsons. So once I'd finished tweaking my boggle-eyed, fish-lipped avatar with a forehead the size of a fucking airplane luggage compartment, the intro cinematic clued me in. Apparently some evil dark fog has descended upon the kingdom of Boletaria and large numbers of adventurers have wandered into it and never returned. So obviously being some kind of world-class intellect, my character thinks the best idea would be to do exactly the same thing. But don't you see I am the world's last hope? Yes, just me and the other 50,000 players who are hanging around. Eventually though, I got through the first dingy castle full of jerks and found the first demon, which was a giant slow-moving cowpat. Probably fitting for the very first tier, but I was starting to think the game was making fun of me. Anyway, some helpful prior player advised me via the medium of floor to use fire-based weapons, so I opened the menu to put some fire on my sword, whereupon I was cowpatted to death because opening the menu doesn't pause the game. Pause, it seemed to say? What kind of faggot are you? I don't care if you need to answer the phone. Real gamers have no friends. Anyway, I eventually managed to return the monster to cowpat's hell, which meant I was rewarded with an actual fucking checkpoint at last and being restored to life, filling my health bar to full and flooding my limbs with renewed strength. Boldly, I stepped out onto the battlements of the castle, whereupon I was immediately insta-killed by a fire-breathing dragon. Whoops, guess you'll have to wait till the next boss to come back to life again, smarmed the game as I entertained the thought of microwaving the disc and feeding the art book and soundtrack CD to next door's goat. Fuck you, Demon Souls. A challenge is one thing, but trying to break down a fucking cement wall with your forehead isn't a challenge, it's grounds for getting fucking sectioned. Yeah, everyone loves the Irish. That is to say, Americans love the Irish. Sadly, the only voice actor they could find was the bloke who did Travis Touchdown in No More Heroes, whose best Irish accent bears about as much resemblance to the genuine article as the photocopy of a poorly wiped anus does to a photograph of Mikhail Gorbachev. This one time I blew all my money on a silenced machine gun in preparation for a big mission, then the alarm got set off the moment I arrived. It was rather embarrassing really, like I'd shown up to a dinner party in my gimp suit. I've honestly lost count of all the ways I've killed Nazis in my life as a gamer. I've killed them in linear first and third person, sandbox first and third person, I've shot their planes down in flight sims, I've invaded their installations in RTSs, and in the Indiana Jones adventure games I point and click their lights out. Now the saboteur has let me beat the Nazis in a go-kart race, so all I have to do now to have the full collection is smack a Nazi to death with a Guitar Hero controller. DJ Hero this year made a wonderfully concerted effort to murder the entire rhythm genre with a controller designed for people who want to give themselves carpal tunnel syndrome, but I'm inclined to give this award preemptively to Microsoft's Project Natal. As long as there's no physical feedback, motion sensor controls aren't just a dead end, they're a dead end full of spiders and your mum standing at the back saying you'll never amount to anything. In an industry where sequels come down like the fucking autumn rain, new intellectual property should be encouraged as they make their first wobbling steps towards their first sellout, but that doesn't mean they should get complacent, so the complete non-starter award is for new IPs that brain themselves on the hospital floor the instant they slithered from the womb. And the clear winner by a unanimous vote of 1 is Wet. If it had just had a main character who was as appealing as a crying baby that's been strapped to the side of your head, that might have been enough, but the gameplay was also like putting all the worst ideas in the world in a smoothie maker and drinking the result from a pouch made from a hollowed out ball sack. So instead I'm giving it to Michael Atkinson, the South Australian Attorney General, who continues to ensure that half the games get banned or censored, and whose ancient, black, dried-up little heart still manfully strives to keep him alive in the face of the searing waves of hatred that are broadcast to him from all over the nation and the world every second of every day. Well done, you miserable old fuck. The most obvious candidate for Game of the Year would be the absolutely spellbinding Duke Nukem Forever, but I am sadly forced to disqualify it because it was so incredibly good that it caused some kind of quantum collapse that erased it from existence and from the memories of the human race. And so the 2000Xs are left behind as we look ahead to the 20XDXs. Perhaps this will finally help us feel like we're actually living in the future rather than a psychotically grim corporate apocalypse where an iPhone has a net worth significantly higher than a human life. Torchlight is a Steam game currently exclusive to PC, and I wouldn't hold your breath for a console port. It would lose a lot of the atmosphere of the original since you wouldn't be able to hear your mouse button clicking about 50 times a second. This is something the game has in common with Diablo, along with absolutely fucking everything else. You click around town, click your way into some quests, click down to the dungeons, click all the enemies to death, and then click back home again. There's more clicks than a school for dolphin telegraph operators. There was one thing that gave me difficulty, for want of a better, more profane word, and that's NPC pathfinding. Perhaps this is another reason why most of the NPCs spend their whole life standing perfectly still, because they get easily confused by any movement more complex than walking in a straight line. My class choice meant I had a constant entourage of imps and robots, and I lost count of how many times I'd emerged from an unusually difficult battle to find that half my assistants were 50 feet back attempting to navigate their way through a foot-high wall. But then again, I did only pay $3 for it over the Steam sale, so I guess the question is, did I have an amount of fun equal to or greater than I would have had if I'd just used the money to buy an ice cream sandwich? And the answer is definitely, as long as the ice cream sandwich was first buried at the bottom of a gravel pit and I have to eat it with a drinking straw. The main character is one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, and considering the gameplay style, it should be fairly obvious which one. Death would make things too easy, famine's a little too gradual, and what the fuck's pestilence gonna do? Cough on people. Anyway, something that strongly resembles the apocalypse happens, war gets a bit overexcited and comes down to earth to stomp on everyone, but wait, where are the other three horsemen? Oh no, turns out this isn't officially the apocalypse, it's just some other unrelated conflict between angels and demons that result in total human extinction. Apparently the right paperwork wasn't filed, so War's bosses get very cross at him, take away his powers, and send him back to act as some kind of cosmic repo man and kick all the angels and demons off the planet until they can fill the proper forms in. Here are the combos you will need to know to master Darksiders: the Chump Chop, square, the Double Chump Chop, square square, and the Whipped Cream Genocide Brouhaha, square square square. If you're an advanced student, remember to also hit the dodge button whenever a nearby enemy produces a megaphone and yells, "Hello, this is me telegraphing my attack. Are you ready? Here it comes now." And what right does War have to be angsty about his life? He's fucking War. He's never had to queue up at the job centre or pine after ex-girlfriends who left him for a surfer. He just breaks things. If I were War and I'd just hoisted a 7-foot demon into the air and chopped him in half with a single swing, I wouldn't stand there scowling. I'd go, fucking hell, did anyone see that? I am squirting machismo out of my nipples over here. I am a monster truck that walks like a man. But what butters my crampons the most is the character design. The main character looks like someone sat down, started drawing him, and then never fucking stopped. A plain black shirt looks cool. A blazer and tie looks cool. What War looks like is a fucking coral reef on legs. I'll say one thing for Sega, they're never been afraid to represent people with hideous birth defects. This was the company that created a sidekick for their chief mascot with an extraneous tail, and presumably by extension extraneous arsehole. And then there was that thing from Knights with 2 additional legs growing out the top of its head. You wouldn't see Nintendo bring out a character with a 3rd nipple or an anus in the centre of their forehead, and Sega are admirably continuing this tradition with Bayonetta, a game about a woman with legs of such bizarre proportions that she must have gotten her feet caught in a motorised winch while being extracted from the womb. When she sits down, her knees come up higher than her ice cream cone hairdo. I'd like to know who the fuck they got in to do motion capture work for this character, because all I can picture is a giraffe that's taken pole dancing lessons. Listen, PS3 developers, I honestly don't mind if you install stuff on the hard drive if it means we can avoid this shit. It's okay, we have a 320 giga. The game loads when you walk across a room, it loads when you pick up an item, and every time you die it calls you a retard and loads for an extra long time. Bayonetta was found at the bottom of a river 20 years ago and now works with demons from hell to kill angels, who are apparently evil because they keep attacking Bayonetta because she keeps attacking them. The baddies, or possibly the goodies, are trying to resurrect some big evil god thing which is linked to some ancient clan of witches and rival clan of sages and some associated evil corporation who presumably felt a bit left out. And there's this guy in a Harry Potter scarf who wants to either kill Bayonetta or bone her silly, and there's this little girl who's either Bayonetta's daughter or a younger version of herself. Sometimes I miss the old Pac-Man storytelling method. Eat pills, avoid ghosts, that's it. Only sometimes you can eat ghosts as well if you... It's not that I went into Dark Void thinking it would be good, because I don't go into any games thinking they'll be good. If I have to search through a dumpster for a lost wedding ring, I could try to convince myself that the dumpster will be full of cakes and freshly picked flowers, but I'll only be fooling myself. Dark Void is a dumpster that appeared to be full of rusty dog food tins, but once I got in I realised they were actually delicious novelty cakes made to look like rusty dog food tins, but then once I started eating them I discovered that the icing was made from wallpaper paste and cyanide, and that's why I feel it let me down. I wonder if the Geneva Convention covers torturing metaphors. The first couple of hours kind of sell the game short. Half close your eyes and suddenly you're playing Uncharted with worse writing, which is kind of like being Julia Roberts but with slightly bigger teeth. And the main character is a lemon in a flight jacket who reacts to all this otherworldly killer robots business with all the emotion and personality of a man trying to sweep the ants off his kitchen floor. Then for some reason I never really grasped, you go to a big tower where you fight a 3-headed robot dragon, then oop, end of game. I was in shock. I reloaded my last save because I was convinced there'd been some bizarre glitch that made the credits come up 3 or 4 hours too early. There's a bit in Dead Space where Philip K. Asimov gets pulled down a hole hole by a tentacle, and he almost claws his way back out of the hole before getting yanked back down to oblivion, and that's Dark Void. It's down, then up, then down again, like an Alzheimer's patient on a stair lift. Alright, fine, for fuck's sake, I'll review Borderlands if it will make you shut up. Except it won't, will it? We both know nothing could do that short of surgically removing your fucking jaw, and even then you can still drool down my ear. So fuck it, I said. Did a great man not once say that every game must be able to stand up on single player alone? Well yes, it was me, on this very website, so it's practically my duty to review it single player style. Besides, saying something gets better when you do it with other people doesn't mean shit, because the same can be said of Hudson Hawk. I might as well mention that there's vehicle driving for swiftly getting from one Jason-infested scrapyard to another, vehicles which handle like a fat dog on a space hopper, and are about as sturdy and well-armoured as an egg and crisp sandwich. But what I really want to talk about is the GUI. It's been a while since I've seen in-game menus as bad as these. It's like PowerPoint threw up on a Cluedo board and died. And it might be true that it becomes tolerable if you do it with some friends around, but so is dying of bowel cancer, and that way they might even feel obliged to take you skydiving. Off-roading around random planets is now replaced by scanning the surface from orbit, launching probes to extract resources, which is as interesting as it sounds, and it sounds like this. Blah. The writing's solid, but then BioWare don't score points for that anymore. Birds fly, fish swim, Michael Atkinson molests dogs, and BioWare games have good writing. But when the characters deliver the dialogue, they always come down with the BioWare face, that uncanny valley-esque look of oddness because the voices and the physical movements are created separately. You can almost see them going over their stage directions in their heads. Hello, Commander Shepard, wave hand. I heard you might show up today, nod head. How about those freaky aliens, eh? Shake fist, grr grr, slightly racist undercurrent. Now, in the film industry, movies tend to get over-publicised when the studios detect the whiff of monster turd about them in order to sell as many tickets on opening weekend as they can before word of mouth gets around. And if the same is true of game publishers, then one would expect the Dante's Inferno box to contain nothing but a dead mouse and the Ebola virus. The game has been marketed up at the raging fiery ring piece over the last year. I myself received a special singing box that I had to smash open to shut up, whereupon it accused me of being wrathful. The other major departure from God of War, besides not being good, is the level up system. When using finishing moves on monsters, you have two options: punish, i.e. smash their face in, or absolve, i.e. smash their face in but in a pious way. So what's the point of having two separate experience levels, you ask? Well, it's like my right hand on a Sunday night, I say. Why is that, you ask? It beats the fuck out of me. I think I've worked out the formula now. A good sequel, like Half-Life 2, Silent Hill 2, Tramway Rovers 3, is one that uses the original as a jumping off point for a whole new story with whole new technology, while a bad sequel merely wallows in the original, like a hippo in a vat of liquidized children. Here's the Bioshock 2 moral choice: fight a Big Daddy, no small task, adopt the little sister, carry her to a corpse somewhere on the level, defend her from waves of sploicers for a minute using up half your health kits and ammo, carry her to another corpse, defend her again to use up the other half, then carry her all the way to an exit vent, and only then can you rescue her. Alternatively, fight a Big Daddy, then pull the little sister's fucking spine out. Yeah, you get the bad ending, but fuck it, I've got places to be. This is Aliens vs Predator though, so there are predators too, who show up now and then to a chorus of "What the fuck was that?" from nearby human NPCs. And I'm waiting for someone to reply, "It's a fucking predator, you moron. The human race has only encountered them like 50 times. Did no one document anything? Didn't at least one survivor put an entry on his fucking live journal? Or did we use up all the data storage media recording all these fucking audio logs?" I think we need a whole new kind of critic for Heavy Rain, critics of interactive storytelling experiences, or wankers as they will come to be known. As it happens, all we have on hand is a game critic, which is a shame because as a game it's a stack of poo-poo pancakes garnished with Ian Thorpe mousse. Heavy Rain is the spiritual sequel to Fahrenheit, aka Indigo Prophecy, aka Baron Von Teapot's fucking ludicrous adventure. Now, I've said before that QTEs sometimes work if they're a core part of gameplay, and in this case they're core, flesh, seeds, branch, and the entire fucking apple tree. But the action is always rather overwrought. It's like someone came to the understandable conclusion that Heavy Rain is a touch slow at times, in the same way that St. Paul's Cathedral is a touch indigestible, so they figured they'd better throw in some loosely relevant karate fight scenes, the most incongruous of which is early on when a woman fights off multiple attackers in her pants, which turns out to be a dream sequence with zero connection to the plot. Good of you to notice that I was getting bored, Heavy Rain, but this was like splicing a song and dance routine into the middle of Zodiac. While you couldn't find a slower boil except by maybe holding a cigarette lighter under a swimming pool, once it gets going, Heavy Rain actually has some really good bits. The Zenith is a hauntingly visceral and fucking hard to watch scene in which you must use a sequence of complex buttonholes to force a character to cut off part of their own body, which just goes to show how budget this Jigsaw ripoff is. None of these fancy metaphorical torture traps, just hack off an extremity where I can see you, bitch. But the stupidest thing is this: it's a murder mystery plot and the identity of the killer is always the same. I was assuming the choices you made changed who the killer would be, since virtually everyone with a car and 2 working limbs was a suspect. What's the point of playing a mystery story again if you know the mystery? It's like trying to jerk off a castrated dog. He won't thank you for it, and all you'll get is wrist exercise. There's a sequence where you and your squad have to run down a street that's being mortared, which was supposed to be a quick exciting moment, but which took me about 50 tries, because surviving a shell to the face takes a little more than can-do spirit and a big moustache. I try to run through it, I get pounded into the dirt. I try to run to cover and wait for it to pass, it plows through my cover, I get pounded into the dirt. I follow directly behind my teammates, but they can't die, so it's the blind leading the blind, and the second blind guy is a sparrow with brittle bone disease who gets pounded into the dirt. The best part is it was apparently a friendly mortaring being conducted by the goodies. Is there not some third side to this conflict I could join, preferably one that isn't full of dicks? I'm on the Cock Express, sharing a cabin with Errol Flynn. Final Fantasy XIII, The Empire Strikes Back, opens with the main protagonist, a former soldier, riding a train with their astonishingly stereotypical stereotypical black sidekick to go fight an evil authority of some description. Wait a girlfriend impaling second, haven't we been here before? Well yes, 12 extremely final times, but the 7th outing more than any other. Of course, Final Fantasy VII didn't fill every cinematic with more shaky cam than a Paul Greengrass film being projected onto a fat jogger's tits. So far, I've established that the two lead-ish characters are named Lightning and Snow, which are both things that can ruin a picnic. There's also another guy called Hope, as in, I hope we can get these sandwiches back in the car before any snow or lightning happens. I know what you're gonna say. Yahtzee, please take your dick out of my eye socket. And why are you even reviewing this game when you're on record as a hater of JRPGs and turn-based combat? Well, bitch, prepare to have your mind blown a second time by the fact that I once enjoyed Final Fantasy. You know why this game is on 3 discs? Not because it's a complex rollercoaster of an epic, it's because it's padded like a menstruating fire hose. I've spent the entirety of the last 5 hours running down 3 different linear corridors. If this were modern warfare, I'd have curb-checked every terrorist in the free world by now. And so we conclude the adventures of Kratos, the ancient world's most determined atheist. He's come so far since God of War 1. The grumpy bastard spent the entire first game acquiring the power to kill just one god, and now he's casually knocking them off like squealing Olympian popcorn. Realising that the sensible, level-headed thing to do will be to pop up to Mount Olympus and sit down with the guy to discuss their mutual grievances, Kratos instead opts to storm the place with an army of murderous titans and try to ram his sandals down Zeus's beard. At which point the story writer said, shit, whose idea was it to put a thrilling climax at the start of the game? Now I have to contrive some unconvincing way to drag this out for another 6 or 7 hours. Whereupon Kratos falls off the mountain. Whoops, clumsy sod. He dies, goes to Hades, gets stripped of his powers and has to fight his way out of the underworld, because that's what always happens. Kratos has enough stamps on his Hades loyalty card by now to get a free coffee and damnation. Of course, the delicious chewy centre of God of War lies in its spectacular boss fights, and God of War 3 certainly seems to be doing its best to nostril fuck the PS3 hardware. The point where you kill Kronos is the most spectacular, if a little difficult to believe, considering he's the size of a pregnant aircraft carrier, and realistically you'd need a team of workmen with pneumatic drills just to give the fat bastard a hangnail. It would be churlish of me to dwell on how long it's taken for the Wii to start sucking less, which is why I'm going to do so. 3.5 years roundabout, Nintendo, that's decent speed for a fucking Glacier. But anyway, here's Red Steel 2, and I've got to admit, this is probably the best motion-controlled combat I've seen on the Wii. Of course, it still isn't very good. It's like being the best at jerking off to your sister in the shower. You only won because no one else entered, and you probably shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. Red Steel 2 is a slightly Tarantino-esque amalgamation of Western and samurai story about a bloke who comes to some city in the desert, apparently for a cosplay convention, and who gets beaten up by bullies for his big gay red coat, and who vows to fight back against them in a convenient ascending order of strength. And it has a cel-shaded art style, because this is the Wii processor we're talking about. It's either that or looking like an episode of Reboot. Now, it must be said, Nintendo really don't think much of you. The fact that they actually released Wii music rather than, say, murdered the creator and burned all his writing speaks well enough to that, because about halfway through you learn a special move called the Tiger, and the game is officially over, bar a few more hours of shoulder exercise. It's a block that stops any attack and immediately breaks the enemy's guard, leaving them open to becoming the deadest things since sliced bread, and this applies to any enemy attack, including bosses. It's like setting the cat among the pigeons, and the cat has an assault rifle. How to be a video games journalist, lesson 37, using game titles for puns and cutting Swifty in jibes. A game name like Just Cause is absolute gold for the reviewer, since it can mean both a just cause, a righteous agenda, or the phrase just because, a dismissive explanation of whimsical or reckless behaviour. The opportunity for puns is obvious. Why would you steal a passenger jet and fly it directly up the bumhole of a sunbathing prostitute? Just cause. Next week on How to be a video games journalist, digging out your higher brain functions with the end of a ballpoint pen. You can motorbike along the coast for hours admiring the scenery, then you ramp off a peasant farmer's hat, send your bike flying through someone's living room, then reenact the Columbine massacre on a government soldier's face. Why? Just cause. 2. And everything that passes for a boss fight shrivels pathetically in the face of Rico Rodriguez, the legendary son of Zeus and a Hispanic window cleaner. There's this one incredibly sharp-witted boss who attacks you with a satellite missile system while standing on the same narrow rooftop as you. Didn't even have to shoot this stupid bastard. It would have practically been assisted suicide. Shuttered Memories is technically a remake of Silent Hill 1 in the same way that a dog biting off your dick is technically foreplay. The horror of a formless unknowable evil is diminished when you attach a human face to it. Humans are reasonable, they wear underpants, go to the toilet, eat crisps, get their sleeves caught on doorknobs. I feel that the best horror antagonists are ones you could never imagine doing the gardening or going shopping for pyramid-shaped helmets. At the end of the game you also get a little analysis of your personality, though I'm not convinced it's not just a random selection of newspaper horoscopes. After my first playthrough it declared I was fastidiously clean and tidy, which is true, that when there are 3 garbage bags in the kitchen waiting to be taken down to the bins I can't rest until they've been diligently ignored. Family-oriented, which explains why I live 12,000 miles away from anyone remotely related to me and never write, and possibly crap in bed. Moving on, but if there's one thing that characterises his games, it's that they always seem to be about someone trying to take over the United States. Speaking as a foreigner, who the fuck would want to take over the United States? It'd be like trying to keep a giant diseased ape in your apartment that eats money and suffers from life-threatening obesity and constant diarrhea, but viciously savages you every time you try to give it free healthcare. Having saved the free world once again, Sam is in hiding somewhere, either because everyone forgot to write down that he was an undercover agent, or because he wants to be spared the embarrassing congratulations party when he's attacked by thugs, learns there might have been more to his daughter's death, and becomes embroiled in the fight against a sinister conspiracy being carried out by the new head of Sam's old company, who who intends to become president by killing the old one, because that's how politics works. Note that Sam only finds out about the conspiracy after it sends thugs to kill him, so the baddies said to themselves, hey, the one guy who could threaten our operation is in a different country and isn't the slightest bit interested in our stupid conspiracy. Fuck that, let's go shoot at him. Now I know why Sam Fisher is the best stealth operative ever, because everyone else in the world is a fucking retard. Nier is in actuality the name of the main character, the guy on the box who looks a bit like Emmett Brown wearing his underpants on his face. I only found this out later though, because before the game tells you his name, it asks you if you can come up with a better one, and thus began the adventures of Twatty Cake, defender of the innocent. Twatty Cake is a middle-aged village handyman who is seeking a cure for his daughter's mysterious disease that makes incomprehensible writing appear on her body, which is exactly the excuse I gave my mum when I got back from the tattoo shop. Insert name here is Combat is of the hacky-slashy variety. Swinging the weapons feels a bit gluey at times, but overall it's functional if uninteresting, like former Prime Minister John Major. Still, others use the same title but add on a word beginning with RE, as in Matrix Revolutions, Alien Resurrection, or indeed Dead to Rights Retribution, which isn't technically a sequel since the plot starts out the same as the first game. So perhaps a better name would have been Dead to Rights Remake, or perhaps Dead to Rights Revisionism. Let's just hope it doesn't end up Dead to Rights Retarded. That would be Dead to Rights Regrettable. In case you never played the first game, here's a Dead to Rights recap. Bang, punch, bang, punch, bang, punch, woof. At one point, Jack demonstrates his commitment to due process by pledging to escort a main bad guy to the police station rather than kill him. 30 seconds later, using him as a human shield to gun down all his bodyguards. I feel Jack is following the letter rather than the spirit of the law, a law completely unique to Jack Slate, given to him by some kind of mad ocelot god that only he can see. And then of course there are the takedowns. When you've beaten up a debatably bad guy enough, you can press a button to teleport both he and Jack to a little pocket dimension where Pain is God and Jack Slate is Pope. Jack's pedigree chum Shadow has been upgraded from his previous role in Dead to Rights 1 as a sort of dog-shaped ballistic missile to full-on NPC support, which means he runs around getting shot and you have to Dead to Rights revive him every now and again, but what do you want? He's a dog. The box art of the game depicts a giant roaring monster gasping in disbelieving horror at his little human friend who has shown up at the Monster Opera in last season's armor. The opening pre-rendered cinematic depicts a sort of battle royale between various species of roaring monster. As it turns out, neither of those things are strongly reflective of the game's content. I never saw any monsters fighting each other. The only truly accurate part of the cinematic is right at the end when a load of humans show up and don't get to do shit. Actually, speaking of the title, we should probably drop the word monster as well, since you usually just kill blameless wildlife that only attacks because you're invading its territory or because you just pushed a sharpened stick down the ear of its favourite child. But I guess calling it hunter-gatherer of innocent young dinosaurs pathetically mewling their last as the memory of their mother's warmth drifts away to be replaced by the unforgiving coldness of, oh fuck it, let's just call it, you bastard. That I was swimming around on the ocean floor looking for a certain kind of sea sponge that the blacksmith needed to rub on my sword to unlock its true potential, when a gigantic fucking sea monster appeared and tried to eat me. Holy Christ, the 3-day database convention just got hit by a meteorite. It was all I could do to swim my fat ass out of the water before it could bite off my fisherman's basket. Whereupon the game said, I'm so sorry, you're nowhere near in the league to be fighting that thing, let's just say no more about it and you can get right back to picking tufts of grass. I took a few more ocean-related missions, but I didn't run into it again. It's not a point in a game's favour when I am literally standing at the water's edge, ringing a dinner bell with my balls on a skillet in the vain hope of making something interesting happen. I'll say one thing for Alan Wake straight away, you can never accuse it of being rushed out. Planning began in 2001. Fuck, the space program didn't last that long. The game opens with a nightmare, full of the usual sort of nightmare imagery, running through a dark forest, being chased by some indistinct evil force, a big voice in the sky giving you a combat tutorial, until Alan wakes up. Oh, I see what you did there. To find a hideous grinning mannequin creature leering over him. Oh wait, that's his wife. Anyway, Alan and his pet monster are on holiday in a small lakeside town when Alan throws a hissy fit because his wife expects him, a professional writer, to actually do some writing at some point, and then a hideous, unknowable evil kidnaps her so they can trade beauty tips. Throughout the game, Alan gives a running narration of events, which is almost always completely redundant at best. While most games will just put a smelly dog in a room and maybe design the room so the player sees the smelly dog as soon as they come in, Alan Wake adds a voiceover going, "Suddenly I saw a smelly dog in the room," and wrestles the camera from you to show the smelly dog guiltily shitting in a hat. One of the side quests involves gathering manuscript pages, which all unfailingly spoil upcoming plot events, which is kind of in keeping with the theme, so I'll let it slide, but it's a shame Alan never uses his foreknowledge to prevent any of the phenomenally bad decisions he's destined to make. For example, accepting the hospitality of a character who, despite her previously cheerful demeanour, is now speaking in a strange emotionless monotone with cold dead eyes and wearing a t-shirt reading "I am possessed," without even entertaining the notion of her being possessed until after having some of her homemade lemon and sleeping pill tea. Or when the comic relief character, in the sense that it's a huge relief when he shuts his fat fucking mouth, suggests getting shit-faced while trapped in a house surrounded by evil shadow murderers, agreeing to do so instead of punching him in the head, and indeed missing all the other opportunities throughout the game to punch him in the head. Alright then, said Rockstar, here's the Ballad of Gay Tony, where every other mission is helicopter-based, but the helicopters handle worst of all. It's like you're constantly airlifting a fucking merry-go-round with a hippo on one side. Alright then, motherfucker, says Rockstar, let's just set GTA 100 years ago so you don't have to drive motorised vehicles at all. Are you happy now? To which I reply, my horse appears to be lodged in a wall. John is being forced by the government to track down and kill his former gang members, who have been laughing and waving their grizzled willies in the face of law and order for too long, in return for which John will be allowed to resume his new simple life of farming with his wife and son. That's the redemption part. Although I'm yet to figure out how the rest of the title comes into it. He's not dead, and the game isn't particularly red either, but I expect brown alive redemption wouldn't have sat well with marketing. There have been many RPGs that let you define your character's personality to a certain extent. Say you're given a quest to get a schoolgirl's cat down from a tree. On average, you'll be given 3 options: neutral, where you get the cat down and accept the schoolgirl's allowance as payment; good, where you waive the fee and fondly tussle the schoolgirl's hair as she scampers off; and asshole, where you set fire to the tree and jump up and down on the schoolgirl's face. And speaking as an asshole, this offends me. There are so many wonderful ways to be a complete ponce that these games rarely cater for. Why can't I rescue the cat but hold it to ransom for her dad's porn collection? Or get the cat down by throwing rocks at it so it breaks all its legs on the concrete, and then still expect to be paid with the infuriatingly infallible logic of a complete tosser? But what's important is that however you play him, Mike Thornton is the ponciest ponce that ever ponced past a poncing parlour. You might be talking to a sexy lady, for e.g., when suddenly an option comes up reading, say, trousers, and there's no way of knowing if this means the Ponce Master General will change the conversation to the subject of trousers, or draw attention to a specific pair of trousers sneaking up behind them, or whatever, so you select it out of panic, whereupon El Ponzo promptly pulls his trousers down and slaps his bum while mooing like a lost calf, spoiling your reputation with the character somewhat. Dialogue seems a bit buggy at times too, which I guess is inevitable with conversation trees as labyrinthine as this. So forget about Jake Gyllenhaal's fantastically close resemblance to a swarthy Arabian man. Forgotten Sands' plot is unrelated and is intended to be slotted into canon just after the original Sands of Time game, and as well as the Sand, asks us to forget about Warrior Within, Two Thrones, and that cel-shaded thing. Fucking hell, I am so on board with this plan, Captain Forgotten Sands. Let's set sail for adventure. Toot toot! Any chance we can retcon Prince of Persia 3D out of existence while we're at it? There's just something terribly cynical about Forgotten Sands that makes me uneasy. It's also by the numbers. When the large bull-like enemy was introduced, I instantly paused the game and announced, "This enemy will charge at me, but if I dodge out of the way at the last second, it will run into a wall and stun itself." Then I unpaused the game and thus were proven my powers of clairvoyance. So anyway, Microsoft's Kinect thing. A combination of Connect, Kinetic, and some colossal wankers in marketing. Apparently it's like the Wii, except it reads your movements without needing a controller, so everything will be fine until a wasp gets in the room, and then your character will promptly throw all their grenades away and pummel a chair. The launch titles are an array of colourful family fun, sports, fitness, and playgroup activity centres, too forcedly cheerful to list. Games anyone can enjoy, promises the blurb. Well, what about people who want to go and see Phantom of the Opera every now and again rather than the Christmas panto every fucking night? Microsoft, what about them? Speaking of re-releasing, as I mentioned earlier, Nintendo is busily tearing its way through all its intellectual property and isn't releasing a single game that can't be prefixed with the words "another bloody," as in another bloody Zelda, another bloody Donkey Kong, and of course another bloody Metroid, developed by Team Ninja of Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball fame, so I look forward to seeing how they work jiggle physics into Samus Aran's power armor. And a hefty shovelful of Nintendo's back catalogue is being remade for the 3DS. A concept that is literally impossible to demonstrate in picture or video, which rather shoots the advertising potential in the foot, but who cares, it's just a gimmick. Call me when they've invented the 3D hologram view screens from Star Trek, or when Nintendo's entire staff commits suicide with carbon monoxide fumes. Metal Gear Solid Rising. Listen to me, Hideo Kojima, you really need to face the fact that nobody likes Raiden as much as you seem to. I mean, no one can say you didn't do all you could. You made him a cyborg breakdancing ninja, and somehow he's still a little bitch, and I don't see how having him prepare fruit salad will remedy that. The sandbox in the first game earned some vicious beatings because the city was about as lively as a Saturday night in the International Space Station, but I thought it could have been saved by adding some more exploration mechanics, cars that react amusingly when you plough your bike into them, and maybe not making us traipse back to the job centre like a lost lamb every time we wanted to do a minigame, and then traipse all the way to the location of the minigame before gnap rawr. As might reasonably be expected, the boss fights are the best part, another array of colourful murderers like a cross between Enter the Dragon and Cannonball Run 2, with enough giant robot fights to break up the succession of button-mashing dodge block combo wrestle with horrible camera routines. There are a couple of fights where you play a different character with a jump ability that's as smooth and controllable as a fat dog on a trampoline, so naturally she has to do some platforming, because after you've jammed a corkscrew through someone's palm, you might as well give it a twist while you're at it. So what does Mario Galaxy 2 do that no other Mario game has done before? Well, just one thing: stagnate. Oh, wait a second, I forgot about New Super Mario Bros. Wii. In that case, fuck all. This is normally the point where I recap the plot, but this time, why don't you all sing along? There are 3 entities: Mario, Princess Peach, and Bowser, the ego, the superego, and the id. One of these entities kidnaps another, and the third has to go in pursuit of them. See if you can figure out which is which. Exactly how stupid does Nintendo think people are? To find an answer to that question, I feel I should point out that as well as a manual, the game box also contains a separate piece of paper reiterating the controls with the large colourful visual aids, and a DVD in which the controls are cooed a third time by a woman with the same patient motherly voice she'd used to potty train a brain-damaged 2-year-old, and a big glossy photograph of the Wii console itself, as if to say, put it in this! What is it with Wii games and map screens lately? It's like every Wii developer struggling to squeeze respectable gaming experiences into the Wii processor limitations woke up one morning saying, hey, we could just do that thing the NES OS did that's one step up from picking from a drop-down menu and not have to do as much work. God help us if anyone shows them a text adventure. The star that shines brightest is all the more glorious for its brevity, or to bring this metaphor down to a broader cultural level, The Simpsons has been running for 21 seasons and hasn't been good since the 5th. At certain fixed moments in the plot, you travel back in time to 1955 to make specific changes to the world of the present and to ensure your parents hook up at the Enchantment Under the Sea and naturally the plot ends up with more holes than Blackburn, Lancashire. If all the history after 1955 gets changed, then why am I still in the present? How do all the other characters know the history was changed? Actually, they do explain that. Someone left a note. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to think of myself as credulous enough to not form international secret societies at the behest of time travel conspiracy theories on random pieces of paper. It'd be like seeing some bathroom graffiti and forming a religion around Big Hank. At the start of the game, when you're first flashed back to 1955, you save a random scientist from a burning building. Seconds later, when you flash back to 2010, the world is under Russian rule and there are big statues of the random scientist all over the place. And then, at the end, the truth is grandly revealed, that history was changed because of you saving that guy. Then, after checking to make sure I hadn't turned over 2 pages at once, I said, "Are you shitting me? You're passing as the big twist, the thing that was established half an hour in? I was expecting the bad guy to be the good guy, or to be me from the future, or made entirely of asparagus. Maybe it's a plot twist designed specifically for people who intermittently fell asleep while playing the game, in which case, hearty congratulations for understanding your audience, Raven Software." Crackdown 2 is the sequel to Crackdown. See, this is the kind of vigorous research that makes me the hard-hitting professional journalist I am. Anyway, in Limbo you play the silhouette of a small child with an oversized head in the silhouette of a big scary world, and your objective is to keep moving right until the game says stop. And bleak is an understatement. This is bleak multiplied by grim to the power of hot topic. Absolutely everything is trying to kill you in needlessly gory ways. Because of the nature of the art style, there's no way of knowing they will do so until your disembodied head is ricocheting off a suicidal pallbearer's hat. There's a sequence early on involving a spider that I won't spoil, but if there's not at least one part of your conscious mind loudly evacuating its bowels throughout, then cancel this afternoon's appointment because you appear to have died. Ooh, Yahtzee moos the farmyard cattle. We'd love to hear your opinion on StarCraft 2. Alright then, you passive-aggressive future casseroles. In my considered opinion, StarCraft 2 can suck on a space tailpipe. I'm taking a holiday in my no StarCraft 2 clubhouse, and you're all invited to come up the rope ladder and join me. Now, in Shadow of the Colossus, the love interest spends the majority of the game flat on her back. Seems T. Maiko have a rather traditional view of gender roles. Suppose we should be grateful she wasn't wearing gingham and cooking us pancakes. But actually, her role is to just lie there driving the plot. You are a hot young stud who has brought his questionably alive lady friend to a forbidden land in order to request that an imprisoned demon bring her back to life, because these arrangements always work out beautifully for all concerned. The gameplay is divided between adventuring alone through the silent wilderness and the 16 tussles with monsters so large you could hollow out their carcasses and repurpose them as low-income housing. In the former, everything's peaceful and contemplative, with no combat and no puzzling besides navigating an occasional mountain that sits obliviously between you and your destination like a fat guy in a cinema, and in the latter, everything's noisy and intense like you're playing Hungry Hungry Hippos backstage at a Dragon Force gig. It creates an effective contrast, like riding a bike down a long and peaceful country road and every other 100 yards the bike turns into a bear. I have a problem with driving games. I like them, but I'm terrible at them. It's the exact opposite to the problem I have with fellatio. It might be because I don't drive IRL because I work from home and live in the city and doubt I would find it easier to get around if I were 6 feet wide and constantly farting carbon monoxide. I don't know how your mum does it. Which brings me to split-second velocity, or rather split-stroke-second, because that's how it's written. So what the fuck does that mean, Disney Interactive Studios? Split or second? Do we have to pick one? Or does the game alternate between being themed around standard units of time measurement and serving suggestions for bananas? Anyway, it's an extreme racing game. You do know the hyphen is the horizontal one, right? Look down, it's right next to the 0. I know it's hard to focus when Mickey Mouse is badgering you for results, but honestly. And because it's set up like a TV show, a lot of the game communicates in the mysterious language of television. Instead of a campaign, it's called a season. Instead of a stage, it's called an episode, and at the end of each episode is a little preview of the next one, full of dramatic music and flashy edits. And that Zack Snyder thing where the camera goes really fast, then really slow, then really fast again, like the cameraman lost the manual to his electric wheelchair. 7 billion light years from the nearest relatable character, there's a big robot planet that looks like a magic 8-ball had sex with a diesel engine, where war has broken out between the Autobots and the Decepticons, colour-coded proud red and fabulous purple, respectively. Bearing in mind my ignorance of Transformers canon, the reason for this war, as far as I could tell, was a largely ideological one. The Autobots think everyone should be nice, and the Decepticons think everyone should be dick pistons. The game borrows somewhat from the aesthetic of the Transformers movies, which is rather like borrowing the aesthetic of a naked homeless man doodling on his stomach with his own shit. So the robots are all big, clanky, dirty monsters, and while this looks perfectly fine, well, while this looks distinct at least against human cities and Shia LaBeouf's big, stupid, chubby, gormless, incredibly punchable, ooh, I'm only in this because the producers think we need a character the audience can identify with, and isn't that just a massive implied insult face? In this game, we have dirty robot monsters fighting against a background of dirty robot environments. Do you see how this might cause an issue? The visuals are such a fucking mess, you can't tell what's an enemy and what's an air conditioner until one starts maintaining the temperature and the other calls you rude names. I've been quoted as saying that the cruelest thing you can do to an artist is tell them their work is perfect when it isn't. It's a policy that has gotten me thrown out of a lot of finger painting classes, but reflect on what huge masochists the developers of Kane and Lynch must be, famously having gotten Jeff Gerstmann fired from GameSpot for not realising that the GameSpot Super Sellout Saver advertising package included a free happy ending on the review table. Kane and Lynch 2 is worse than deep-fried tampons. Still, doesn't hurt to play safe, so here's a nice quote for the box art. Kane and Lynch 2 Dog Days is a game so intense it literally physically assaults you, because after playing for the 4 or 5 hours necessary to complete it, it gave me a headache like I'd been skull-fucked with Pinocchio's splintery Todger. Kane and Lynch, gritty realism's answer to Laurel and Hardy, if Laurel occasionally forgot to take his meds and shot the hostages, are in Shanghai for an arms deal, and while idly passing the time shooting some locals in a very gritty realistic way, accidentally kill someone they shouldn't have and provoke the most powerful man in China. Ho ho, will those bumbling ninnies ever do anything right? Kane and Lynch are arrested by the army and are taken through the city centre in a convoy of helicopters rather than in, say, one car, so they hijack their helicopter and immediately begin strafing nearby skyscrapers where all the office workers apparently stash rocket launchers in the water coolers. Then they crash on the building that just happens to contain the big boss they've made an enemy of, and despite having spent the entire game desperately trying to escape China in fear of this guy, they suddenly decide they might as well just drop in and kill him. You know, while they happen to be in the neighbourhood. The Chinese army helicopters then continue strafing the building, apparently because Kane and Lynch made it look like so much fun, which would be difficult to explain to your boss even if said boss wasn't currently in the building, alone, unguarded, and making no effort to evacuate the building that is under direct aerial assault. Not the sort of thing that's going to look good on the quarterly employee evaluation, is it? And the confrontation with the big boss isn't even the climax. The game just potters around for another mission to pad out the pathetic playtime, constantly checking its watch before going, fuck it, that'll do. And I swear this is true, the final boss fight is 2 dogs. The biggest threat in the game could have been outwitted by chucking a fucking bonio at it. And then it just ends. Cuts are black. The characters have achieved nothing, learnt nothing, and will hopefully now jump in a big black hole and return to nothing. Kane and Lynch 2 sucks so many dicks it now breathes spunk instead of air. Mafia 2 is a game about the Mafia. They were going to call it Quest for the Sausage Fountain, but you know how people are, you have to spell everything out. I wouldn't say Mafia 2 is a bad game, I'm just not sure it knows what it wants to do. And the ending's a disappointment. Without wishing to spoil, it's like if the Shawshank Redemption ended while Tim Robbins was still covered in poo in a pipe. After reaching the crime does not pay phase of the standard Mafia storyline, the game just sort of cuts out halfway through resolving everything. My suspicion that Metroid Other M might gargle gonads was first raised when the blurb prominently boasted features fully voiced movies. Now when you're trying to sell a game, I would remind you a prominently interactive medium with the non-interactive element, that evokes the image of a marketer despondently rolling their head back and forth along a keyboard. You know, I always thought that after the initial shock at the end of the very first Metroid that Samus's breastplate was more appropriately named than you thought, the series' position has basically been that she's a lady, just deal with it, yo. But Other M just can't seem to stop banging on about it. The plot is somewhere between Aliens and G.I. Jane, and has a central theme of motherhood, which is woven into the narrative about as subtly as a sperm whale in an airplane luggage compartment. Up until this game, Samus was a silent protagonist, so the decision to give her a voice was one that needed to be carefully handled to avoid fanboys queuing up to piss into Team Ninja's letterbox. One way to mishandle the change, for example, would be to pick a voice actress who has undergone several amateur lobotomies and delivers every line of dialogue with all the searing emotion of someone in an old folks' home doing the monthly stocktake of oatmeal. From Adam's stern expression, constant swearing, and repeated kicks to my face and stomach, I realised he must have been a bit upset about something. Much has already been made of the power-up mechanic, that Samus already has them all in her overnight bag, but refuses to use them until her commanding officer, with whom she has surrogate daddy issues up the delicately sculpted arse, authorises it. This leads to a rather notorious moment when Samus blunders through an extremely hostile atmosphere without protective clothing because daddy didn't specifically order her to wear some, putting her on the intellectual level of one of those robot vacuum cleaners. Oh yes, and there's this murder mystery plot set up early on. 6 different members of a military squad are introduced and established with names and slightly anemic personalities, but then it transpires that there's a traitor among them picking them off. You even have a boss fight with him, his face cunningly concealed by camera angles and bits of scenery. So do you want to know who the traitor turns out to be? So the fuck would I, because the game kind of forgets about this whole subplot and hopes you do too. You see, there are 3 kinds of horror games. First there's the kind where you're in a dark room and a guy in a spooky mask jumps out of a cupboard going a bloogie woogie woo. That would be your Doom 3. Then there's the kind where the guy in the spooky mask isn't in a cupboard but standing right behind you and you just know he's going to go a bloogie woogie woo at some point but he doesn't and you're getting more and more tense but you don't want to turn around because he might stick his cock in your eye. That would be your Silent Hill 2. And then there are the horror games where the guy in the spooky mask goes a bloogie woogie woo while standing on the far side of a brightly lit room before walking slowly over to you, plucking a violin and then slapping you in the face with a T-bone steak. That would be your Dead Space. Dum-de-dum, well this isn't very scary. Oh look, physics, I can throw chairs around like a removal man who's completely stopped giving a shit. Doors suddenly blowing open in the wind, yawn-a-rama, guess I'll just look around upstairs and then might as well play Halo Reach for a bit. Nope, nothing much up here either. I'll just go back and... whoa, what was that thing I just glimpsed running down a hallway? I don't know, but it looked cross about something, so I think I'll go down this other hallway instead. Oh, it's blocked. Guess I'll turn around and... where did you come from? Run, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mess your chairs up. Oh, pissing blimey, there's jam coming out of the walls. I do respect Bungie for so firmly drawing a line under their popular series, which sits just above refuse a second helping of pancakes on the list of things George Lucas will never do. But anyone who thinks this is the last we'll see of Halo clearly has no ambitions of joining the Microsoft Game Division's strategic planning department. I'm sure they'll be stashing this particular elderly corpse in the crawl space and cashing its pension checks long after Bungie have toddled off to make their long-awaited sequel to Oni. So after everyone just sort of got over the whole zombie apocalypse thing in the first game, an effort is made to just live and let unlive with the zombies, or rather live and let splatter splatter all over pay-per-view TV with chainsaw motorbikes. But there's another gosh darned outbreak, and our hero Chuck Green is trapped in a glitzy Vegas-style hellhole with a disproportionately large number of psychotic murderers with ridiculous amounts of health. The story is naturally retarded. This is Capcom we're talking about. Capcom make game stories the same way tumble dryers make potato salad. From a certain point onwards, a surprising number of survivors refuse to follow you until you pay them money. Oh, okay, I'll just leave you inside that zombie's mouth for an hour or two while I go find an ATM. Sorry, survivor, I forgot. Did you say you wanted money or to be punched in the face with flaming boxing gloves? Because those I've got. After I save the game, I say, right, tomorrow I will reload that save, so everything I do now is consequence-free. Then I can run around experimenting, testing new combos, trying on women's dresses, and breaking wind into the phone every time my support character reminds me to find medication for my terminally ill child. And while foiling a museum robbery by some bloke who looks like he was dressed by the Liberace space program, Spider-Man accidentally shatters the magical tablet of MacGuffin, scattering its bits across 4 dimensions of time and space. Because of magic, I guess. See, this shit wouldn't fly with Batman. If any magic tablet tried to scatter itself across dimensions on his watch, he'd just will himself into existence and punch the writer until he promised to stop being such a twat. It certainly comes alive during the Deadpool chapter, where you're given more freedom to swing around, although Deadpool is voiced by Nolan North, who I'm sure is a perfectly nice man in real life, but every character he voices makes me want to pull off my thumbs. Normally I spend the first paragraph of these little tonsil exercise sessions leading into things with some rambling spiel of only borderline relevance, like maybe in this case wondering aloud if one could improve every Castlevania game by replacing Dracula with the Count from Sesame Street, although probably not Symphony of the Night because you'd have to rename Alucard to Tirtzimas's morph to Nuoketh. But this week, let's get straight to the meat of things, shall we? Castlevania Lords of Shadow contains a Portal reference. That is literally all you need to know. It's attempting to jump on a bandwagon so late that the band has completed 3 sellout world tours and sold their wagon to a scrap dealer. But before I can bring down my well-used like God of War but stamp, like the terrible hammer of judgment that it is, the game dodges my swing and goes, wait, here's something original. Every now and again you have to have thrilling boss fights with monsters so big you have to ledge climb all over their bodies, pausing to hold on when they try to thrash you around like a little murderer's nipple tassel, and chip away at their health by pecking at glowing weak spots. Say, I reply, another word for giant monster is Colossus, isn't it? I know what you're thinking, retorts Castlevania Lords of Shadow of the Colossus, but we're not like that game at all. That game had 16 Colossi and we've got 3. That's a completely different number. So where do you want this like God of War butt stamp, I ask, after an embarrassed cough. On my face, please. Hopefully this will keep us going until someone makes Space Pilot Jesus Christ vs. Mecha Pontius, but don't delude yourselves, Enslaved isn't inspired by Journey to the West, is it? That is something I find considerably difficult to swallow, because the game takes liberties with the original story in the same way that Jason Voorhees takes liberties with cheerleaders. Basically, the only bits of Enslaved that are inspired by the story are the character names, some of Monkey's weapons, and the headband thing. It's like renaming Master Chief to Elizabeth and arguing that Halo was inspired by Pride and Prejudice. There are times, and one scene in particular, when I get the extremely strong impression that Monkey secretly gets off on being dominated. That and slapping robots in the dick. That becomes clear when you get a slow-motion close-up for killing the last robot in the room and Monkey's got this look on his face like he's getting sucked off in a wind tunnel. Woke up in a doctor's office with some guy telling me I've been shot in the head and may have suffered brain damage, but I've learned not to trust the opinion of giant mustachioed spider people, so I made my excuses and left. The town I found myself in was pleasant enough with all kinds of useful supplies that residents were just giving away, that is to say, not supervising, but everyone seemed to think I wanted to go in pursuit of the bloke who shot my brain. But I'd have thought the fact that he shot me in the brain was a fucking good reason to not pursue the guy. I keep hearing about this new Vegas place that sounds like a happening kind of town, Daddy-O, and the most direct route is north, so after loading myself down with other people's packed lunches, I set off on the north road with a song in my heart and was immediately eaten by giant killer flies. I set off in a southeasterly direction and was attacked by bandits who I could now kill from a smug position of moral superiority. Then I took all their stuff, which isn't stealing because they attacked me, making it mine by international law of go fuck yourselves. You've got to feel sorry for Star Wars fans in this day and age, when you're not mocking them or kicking them down flights of stairs, I mean. So I look forward to seeing how the fanboys justify the Force Unleashed too, because it is the most grossly offensive and mishandled application of intellectual property since the Schindler's List Easy Bake Oven. So we slip back into the Cuban hills of Starkiller, the most hideously overpowered thing in the Star Wars universe, until they figure out how to glue 3 Death Stars together. So, here are all the ways you can kill people in this game, like a bullied teenager with a semi-automatic and an Oedipus complex. You can hit them with a lightsaber if you're some kind of watercress-eating spod with no imagination. You can reflect their blaster shots back at them. You can throw your lightsaber at them. You can microwave them with force lightning. You can force push them into walls. You can lift them off their feet and throw them at their mates. You can lift them up, microwave them, throw your lightsaber at them, then throw whatever mess remains at their mates. And you can Jedi mind trick them into fighting each other or hurling themselves off bridges, which is incidentally hilarious. And yet, none of the enemies seem the least bit afraid of you. It's like they all went to the wrong briefing by mistake, and somewhere in the universe a platoon of terrified SWAT officers with riot shields and machine guns are facing off against a single confused Ewok. Gameplay pro tip: keep your distance and deflect its missiles back at it. Which enemy is that a pro tip for, Yahtzee? Throw a fucking rock. That's also a good tactic. I'm actually insulted, and I'm not even a fan of this stupid franchise. If I was, I'd already be measuring myself for the noose. But here's a nice quote for your box art, Force Unleashed 2. Could almost have been written by George Lucas himself, because what George Lucas does is not so much writing as it is vomiting through a pen. And there are many moments when I just want to yell time out and demand someone explain what the fuck's going on before another thing explodes. Because the thing about all the Call of Duty games I've played lately is that they all seem to be hooked up to IV drips full of pop rocks. Black Ops just can't calm the fuck down. If 5 seconds ever pass without a gunshot or an explosion, then it's probably because you just passed out from an epileptic fit. The game's like a nagging spouse slapping you around the back of the head every 5 seconds. Go there, keep running, take cover, not there, you're getting shot. There, shoot that guy, not him, he's on your side. Can't you tell he's wearing a slightly different hat? Quick, pick up that grenade and throw it back. I don't know, over there somewhere. Oh, there, see, if you'd thrown it sooner, that wouldn't have happened, you stupid cunt. Why is my character putting broken glass into the mouth of a helpless prisoner? I don't think he'd find that very tasty. Yo, bugger my britches, that was uncalled for. Who are the good guys in this game again? The weird thing is, the character then joins your party after he's done spitting out blood and bits of mouth. That's one working relationship that's off to an awkward start. See, I was going through Sonic Colors this week because it actually left a good first impression by opening with gameplay rather than tortured cutscene bullshit. But then after 2 levels, the game went, aha, you fell into my trap, tortured cutscene bullshit away. Afterwards, I felt angry and ashamed of myself for falling for it yet again. Sega plonks Sonic the Hedgehog on the front of something and swindles another $80 of the escapist's money, for shame. My other objection is that the little lizard thing is the most entitled little shit in gaming since Ashley from Resident Evil 4, and at least she had a rack on her. He just sits there on his fat little arse with his mouth hanging open, expecting his Divine Majesty's breakfast to just drop in like a Half-Life barnacle without the charm. How about an alternative gameplay mode that replaces the sweetie with a breeze block? Hey, wait a minute, Halfbrick are based in Brisbane, the same city where I live. I, with my well-documented close ties to the local games industry. Yahtzee, are you using your privileged position to big up your mates again, you nepotistic shit? Let me assure you that historically being my mate has been no guarantee of safe critical passage. Don't forget my other friend who worked on the chariot racing sequences in Prince of Persia 2 Thrones. He certainly hasn't. What surprises me about Assassin's Creed Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood is that it is actually a sequel. I assumed it was going to be some kind of optional add-on story for Assassin's Creed 2 in the mold of Final Fantasy X2, but with hopefully less Final Fantasy X2. Meanwhile, future Desmond and his future Scooby gang of attractive college students are traipsing around future Italy, searching Ezio's memories for the location of the recurring MacGuffin they think will solve all their problems. And I won't spoil the ending, but let's just say that it certainly does that. Sometimes I like going to hospitals for terminally ill children and just rubbing it in. Wow, you guys really suck at arm wrestling. Anyone catch the new R18 rated film? I have, it's not that great. Hey, you know what would be funny if the Make-A-Wish Foundation came around and you asked to be sexually initiated by a large creepy man? That'd throw them a curveball, wouldn't it, the smug philanthropic cunts. In total, Splatterhouse has robbed something like 8 hours of my life, making me watch the same 3 or 4 overlong death animations 50 bazillion times, until I regard the shredded meat and gushing stumps with the same bored dispassion I'd use to spread jam on my croissant. And it's not enough for your guy to simply throw off an enemy grapple, he's got to also then bang their head on the floor for 5 minutes like he's rubbing his dog's nose in a clandestine turd while I nip off to bring the laundry in. You know, as a child I used to have a phobia of theme park mascots, emotionally repressed even then. I was suspicious of their instant friendliness, fixed grins, and eagerness to take me into the gents to show me Herman the Hairy Snake, the secret mascot who only comes out for good little boys and girls with weak gag reflexes. You'll be pleased to know I have now conquered this fear, thanks in part to Epic Mickey, a game about systematically demolishing Disneyland while Mickey Mouse repeatedly falls off cliffs, whether you want him to or not. There's this one vintage Mickey Mouse comic in which he breaks up with Minnie and spends the rest of the comic attempting suicide. I swear this is true, and it was way edgier than this. Chippendale Rescue Rangers was edgier than this. Fucking Kingdom Hearts was edgier than this, if only because of the usual JRPG paedophilia subtext. Perhaps the camera issues wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the level design. For a lot of them it's like they got together all the pieces of the level, dropped them on the floor in a big pile, and then, I don't know, there was a bomb threat or an ice cream van drove past and everyone ran outside, and someone else came in to pick up the finished level and didn't realise the bits hadn't been put together yet. Not that there's not enough opportunity to get your bearings, I suppose. You're only going to see them all 18 million times.